Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this new series called The History of the Soul War. Written by Eddie. This is a new series, so if you like any parts of it, I would be very appreciative if you head over to the original post and let the author know. Anyways, on to the story. Lesson 1. Humanity has rules. The instructor stood behind his lectern. The honor marks on his carapace marked him as a veteran of over a dozen conflicts, including the Soul War. He watched the young recruits file into the lecture hall, so full of cheer and bravado. He watched as they sat down and finally took notice. He wasn't the usual lecturer they had. As he started to speak, the UV lights dimmed and the screen behind him lit up. A collective gasp went out from the recruits. On the screen behind him, there was an image of a fellow Tricle, a plate that protected his head shattered and the upper part of his exoskull missing. Thick green blood splattered across his carapace. The veteran didn't even bother to let them get acquainted with the image behind him before he started talking. That is the result of an angel's tooth, a human invention. He paused to let the class recover some of their stomachs. This picture was taken toward the end of the Soul War, when we had agreed terms of engagement with the humans. The Federation made the mistake of invading the Sol system. They considered humanity a non-threat. The class almost giggled. Such a suggestion now was as if to suggest a black hole was a safe place to have lunch. Humanity had just discovered FTL flight, and as such were deemed capable of interstellar war by the Council. Thus, a valid target for invasion. However, to explain why this is not how humans wage war, we must first look at the human's own history. He clicked at the lectern, and the image behind him changed. A grainy sepia image. Several of the recruits recalled their antennae curling back in fear. On the picture were human warriors marked in combat. This is from the human's own archive. Humanity has been at war with itself since before it found out how to record that war. Unlike our society, which formed around a strict hierarchy of age and wisdom, humanity decided their leaders through strength of arms, at least until the development of chemical projectile weapons. He paused to catch his breath, as well as look at his notes. Humanity entered an age known as World War I. To suggest that a species would wage a war upon itself to such a scale that it encompassed the entire planet is unthinkable. To suggest that it happened more than once is beyond reason itself. However, humanity did such a thing, not once, but 3 times. There was a 4th great conflict within humanity. This, however, encompassed 2 planets, so humans do not consider it a world war, despite involving more than one world. He shook his head, disapproving of such complex naming conventions. Human naming had only gotten worse with the centuries since they had entered the galactic stage. One of his honorific marks was for a human-named battle, the so-called battle where all the chips were down. Bringing himself out of his reverie, he continued his lecture. Some of the recruits were looking bored. They'd come here to learn about the Soul War, and not another species' history. Humans committed such atrocities in the first of these world wars that they created an agreement that they would never use specific weapons again, and how they would treat those they captured. Humans abided by this. Their solution was to simply create weapons not prohibited by the agreement. Poison gas, flamethrowers, and other such weapons. The class shuddered. The idea that any species would develop weapons so horrific they needed to be outlawed and then simply make different ones when those were forbidden was alien to their minds. The humans called these rules of engagement. Each time a new weapon was developed that was too horrific to be used, it was added to the so-called convention. The agreement was, so long as no one used these weapons, no one else would. He finally clicked on the next image. This one was a collage of lots of smaller images, each depicting a different weapon. The Angel's Teeth, the Loiter Missile, Agent Blue, Phosphex, orbital lance weapons, cookie cutters, knife missiles, and dozens more. Each of these weapons is on that list. This is but a small sample. The most lethal, terrifying, horrific, and these. He moved on to the next image. All of the images had a blue circle over them, all but two. Are the ones that humanity had used against its foes in the various galactic wars. These two, he waved a hand at the only two unmarked images, are only unused because humanity has never produced them. The mere theory of them was enough to have them placed upon the list. There was a tentative from the seats on one of the recruits raised a hand. The lecturer inclined his antennae, an indication to continue. Why? What do those two weapons do? A recruit asked, his pincers clicking with nerves. The old veteran chuckled. The first is the Star Cracker. When fired at a star, it instigates a chain reaction that results in the star itself going nova. The class looked aghast. Surely no sane species would ever dare dream up such a concept. It was a horrific idea, to develop a weapon that could extinguish a system's star. The second, he continued, is a fabric destabilizer. In theory, it is supposed to destabilize the fabric of space-time, in the same way that our FTL drives use them to enter slip space. However, this weapon would do it in a highly uncontrolled manner. The specific effects are unknown. He took a moment to let the idea sink in to the class. Humanity developed a weapon that even they didn't understand the effects of. The student who'd asked had gone green as his blood rushed to the surface in shock. Humanity, as we all know, has the capacity for great kindness. They tend to back bond with anything, even inanimate objects. The slide changed, this time to an image of one of the universal cleaning robots that were omnipresent in most larger cities. This specific one had a combat knife taped to its side and Stabby written on it in a luminous pen, as well as a crude rank insignia, marking it as a captain. The picture also included several humans looking very happy at the fact that they'd modified the cleaning drone. For example, there was a sudden spate all across known space, with human crew members pack bonding with cleaning drones and weaponizing them, stating that they had adopted that specific drone. The class actually chuckled, the clicking of their laughter echoing in the large lecture hall. The idea of any creature becoming attached to a drone was absurd to them. However, in the same measure, humanity is possibly the crudest and most vicious race in the galaxy has ever seen, but only when pushed to it. Most humans value kindness and compassion over other things. These words had no real meaning in the tricool society. Honor, truth, and virtue were things, but kindness and compassion, they were reserved for one's brood. Not all species, yet humans seemed to show them to anyone they came across. This is why humans have rules of engagement. The instructor paused. The class was confused. Why would such a supposedly kind and compassionate race have the necessity for warfare seemed illogical? Yet they all knew humans. Tougher than the Varshun and far more lethal. They had all heard the stories. Humans who had blades of bone in their maws. Humans who were the first spacefaring predatory species. Humans who had had to outlaw their own weapons. Yet, there was undeniable evidence that humans were kind and compassionate. They had watched the human rescue missions on Holovids. Humans risking life and limb to save, well, anyone. The instructor inhaled again, 2 breathing holes at the back of his neck, then continued, You will understand why it came to pass and now in a few lectures. But the Federation broke these rules without even being aware of it. And suddenly, the Soul War changed. Whereas before it had been the slow war against a technologically inferior foe, it became horrific. Weapons we had never even dreamed of were being used against us. We'd assumed humanity's weapon capacity did not extend beyond basic kinetics. We were wrong. He clicked on the next slide, and a large cylindrical object was displayed behind him. Along its length, in human symbols, were the words Starheart Loiter Missile, and the symbol for radiation. None of the class actually knew what it did or was, only that the symbol on it was a warning. This is the first time we encounter what the humans call nuclear weapons. We call them fusion weapons. The class looked at the grey cylinder in shock. Fusion weapons were supposed to be unused by Starfaring race due to the fallout. But here it was, the first of humanity's banned weapons to be shown to the galaxy at large. This specific type is a loiter missile. So called because once activated, it drifts in space with passive scanners running. It emits no energy nor any signal. For any scanner or observational device short of an actual optical scan, it is harmless space debris. However, when a ship that does not have the correct safe passage codes passes within range, he clicked his control device again, and the image zoomed out, showing a Federation cruiser. Suddenly, the loiter missile lit up and opened a full thrust towards the cruiser. The acceleration was immense. The missile itself being mostly pure fuel oxygen mix with only the sensors, a gimbal, and a gyroscope stabilizer, alongside the warhead to take up space, accelerates at terrific speed, the instructor provided. The missile impacted with the side of the cruiser. Shields flashed, and a titanic sphere of fire and radiation raged against them, blazing against the shields, which eventually lost the battle with the nuclear firestorm, vanishing in a pulse of multi-hued light. A section of the cruiser's side was melted and fused, an engine nacelle torn away and lost to space. The image stopped. These missiles do not care if you were military or civilian. At the first, humanity deployed them like a barricade, trying to dissuade us from entering their system. But then they'd been jumping to our systems and deploying them within our systems. Any shipping lane, any stellar route, or Lagrange point, there are still dozens out there, cold, silent, waiting. This is what humanity is like when provoked. This is the reason they have the rules. He looked at the class. The mixture of fear, horror, fascination, and curiosity shown on their antennae and postures was just about right. Next lecture will be on the invasion of Earth and why every human beyond maturation, and some approaching it, should be considered capable of lethal combat. Class dismissed. End of chapter. Chapter 2. Humans are always armed. The lecturer watched his class filter in. As before, he stood behind his lectern. His rear left leg was scratching idly at his foreleg. They were excited and apprehensive in equal measure. The last lecture had left them a little shaken. He waited for them to sit down and settle in this time. No need to grab their attention or shock them. He lowered the lights with his remote and opened to the first slide. A tiny blue marble suspended in a sunbeam on a background of black. Death World classifications has always run from Alpha to Delta. Delta-class worlds are habitable with some minor securities in place, he said as the class's antennae swayed in confusion. This wasn't how it was last time, nor was it a lecture on humans and how they were supposedly armed at all times. Alpha-class death worlds are graded from 1 to 5. The number being how many cycles you can survive without protection or support. Earth, the human home planet, is considered an Alpha 4 class death world, on average. However, there are sections that are considered Alpha 1 or even Alpha 0. The class looked at each other. They'd known humans were death worlders, but they assumed they were from Beta class death world. To have a species that came from an Alpha 4 class death world was supposed to be impossible. This has led to the creation of a new grade of death world, Alpha H, or Alpha Human. Simply put, these are planets that no sentient life other than humans can survive on. In most cases, humans thrive. The class looked at one another for a second time in as many minutes. Humans. Humans like death worlds. If these lectures were doing one thing, it was teaching the class that humans were not only impossible to fight, but they were insane as well. The lecturer moved on to the next slide. This one was a small arachnid creature, all brown in coloration. This is important to remember. The Federation grades death worlds on how easy it is for sentient life to survive. Thus, most home worlds are not even close to that list. It was for this reason, when the first wave of troops were so utterly decimated, Toxic insects, carnivores of all sizes, venomous reptiles and amphibians, even some plants were lethal on contact. With the scanners showing a breathable atmosphere for 78% of the Federation members, most troops did not use sealed suits. We landed all across Earth. Then, all hell broke loose. At this point, we had faced the human military. We assumed that they were unique among humans, trained and drilled like that, like our military forces. We were wrong. The lecturer let out a long, low whistle from his breathing tubes, a trichal version of a sigh. I will not be discussing Earth itself and its dangers further in this lecture, and if you wish to research it yourself, I suggest you start with Australia, since some humans are scared of that location. There was some clicking as the class muttered to each other's. Humans scared of a location? Impossible. Humans refused to go places where they could be harmed or would be at risk. But scared. Humans were almost never scared. Almost. And things that scared humans were few and far between. Once we had realized that Earth was not a Delta Plus class planet, but rather an Alpha-level death world, and took suitable precautions, we were capable of approaching human population centers and military bases without significant risk from the local flora and fauna. He moved on to the next slide. This one was a map of Earth. I will not go over individual resistance. However, I will isolate certain unique areas and their specific trends. He said and pulled out a UV laser pointer to indicate areas. He started on the far left of the map. This upper section, known to the humans as Americanda, we discovered that nearly every human was armed with almost military-grade hardware. This would not have been an issue. However, the inability to create a secure base of operations without humans cropping up somewhere and opening fire at something caused issues in establishing a beachhead. This, combined with the fact that the humans seemed more than willing to damage their own infrastructure to deny it to us, slowed our progress. This fact will become almost universal. The next area was a tiny island in the center of the map. Shockingly enough, this tiny island is the capital of what is called amongst the humans the Commonwealth, a conglomerate of an ancient empire, reformed into a dispersed democratic group, each self-governing. It generally includes small islands or countries that are too small to defend themselves. The lecturer indicated several small islands scattered across the map, as well as the larger one with the lower right section. It is one of the most dispersed of the Terran states, but it still holds sway. He shook his head again. Humanity and its politics. He'd never understand it. One would think such a small island would be an easy task to take. This is not the case. This island, it turns out, is made up of 3 separate groups of people, each refusing to be identified as the same as the other. I'll only be outlining one of the key events. It was discovered that humans use music for war. He paused again to inhale and let the class catch up. Several species of the Federation are sensitive to specific audio frequencies, specifically within the 470 Hz to the 480 range. Sounds within this range cause nausea, instability in their physical movement, and can even render them unconscious. Normally, conversing or normal short-term exposure is not an issue, as the effects only persist momentarily after the noise has ceased. He clicked the controls for the presentation of a very strange image was presented on screen. It was a human male in what appeared to be human female clothing, a dress and long socks. However, it held a bag with several tubes coming out of it. None of the class knew what to make of it. Then, from the lecture room speakers came an ear-splitting, warbling, droning sound. It was awful enough to make most students retract their heads into their protective exoshell and attempt to cover their audio receptors. Once the sound had stopped, the lecturer spoke up. That was not an artificial noise, nor a sound made by some injured creature. Rather, that was produced by a human instrument. Specifically, these pipes you see here. He highlighted the supposed instrument the human was holding. The Federation forces first heard the sound when attempting to march upon cities on this tiny island, only to find humans had for some reason maintained ancient fortifications from wars they waged prior to the discovery of chemical-propelled kinetics. Not only that, but they had manned such fortifications against our forces. The sound I played to you was from a single human instrument. They had dozens of them. We arrived at night, assuming that the humans, being diurnal creatures, would not be able to spot us. The first we knew of them was that noise, he shuddered. Clicking back to the map of Earth, he indicated a large landmass that dominated the upper center of the map. The European Union, as humans called it, presented another challenge. More historical fortifications, stubborn populace, their cities were laid out like a maze made by a madman. That does not include the willingness of humans to use anything they have available to them as weapons. Cooking implements, cleaning tools, transport vehicles, to name a few. He moved on quickly, as if unwilling to further talk about the problems. To prevent this lecture becoming one on why invading humans' held planet is terrible, I will be giving only one more example, he said, identifying the rightmost island. This island, we discovered, had a very strong martial tradition, with their heritage being treated as something living, to be practiced and kept alive. According to human records, it was the first time in several centuries that those methods of war had ever been practiced in anger. Ancient martial traditions that humanity had carried with them saw us retreating from their planet. The Federation forced to retreat from Earth for the second time. The first due to the planet itself, the second due to non-military population. The lecturer moved on to the next slide, a simple diagram of a human. Humans are a predator species. However, they do not have any of the highly adapted hunting traits that most non-sentient predator species have. Humans made up for this through their natural stamina and what is called kinetic linking. This allowed them to simply run their prey to ground with their stamina or hurl objects over distances that would be impossible for other sentient species. This was at the earliest outset of their evolution into a species of Homo sapiens stellaris we know today. This tradition, however, did not die out with the advent of more practical weapons. They simply created sporting events that continued this tradition. He clicked a button on his controls and a few videos started playing at once. Humans throwing and kicking spheres as well as several throwing long-pointed objects. This is not humans practicing war. This is human sports, competitive activities with rules and tactics, often performed in a friendly manner. These sports are mostly derived from some aspect of war. Two teams facing one another down in a competition of speed, strength, and tactics. He clicked the button again, and one of the videos blew up to fill the whole screen. The video was on humans throwing an oblong ball to one another and seeming to fight over it. This is one of the more aggressive human sports. As you can see, a human at full sprint can impact with enough force to crack carapace of a tricle. This, however, is not their preferred method of unarmed combat. Rather, they'll use their capacity for kinetic linking and advanced hand-eye coordination to hurl objects upwards of 100 kilometers an hour. A well-weighted object can cause significant damage to any unarmored foe. The fact that humans can do this with shocking accuracy means that a human with a suitable object can be considered always armed. He moved on to the next slide, containing an image of a human partway through throwing an object. Please take note, this is only one method of throwing things humans have developed. However, it serves as an example for kinetic linking. He paused as the students scribbled notes on tablets and quietly dictated notes to recording devices. The lecturer themselves looked down at the notes they had before them. They were somewhat apprehensive about the next part, humans and unarmed combat. The first time he had encountered a human after the Soul War was during a combat tournament that had been taking place every few years for centuries on the Kursk home planet. That human, it turned out, was trained in what the humans called mixed martial arts. The tournament was a contest of strength. Most Orcs were slightly smaller than humans, but stronger. The objective was always to knock your foe over. The human had caused new rules to be written for every aspect of the tournament. They hadn't just knocked foes over. They'd thrown them, tripped them, kicked them, spun them, and in one instance full-on hurled their challengers. Unlike the tricle, who had 4 legs, 2 arms, and 2 harvesting claws they'd used to crack open nuts and tree bark. The Korsk were bipedal with 4 upper arms and hooved lower limbs. The lecturer moved on to the next slide. 2 humans stood side by side in civilian clothing. One looked well-muscled and built in the prime of his life, maybe 1 meter and 90 centimeters. The second was maybe 170, was clearly past his prime in life. His hair was white and his face was showing the wrinkles that clearly indicated age in humans. Some humans prefer close-quarters combat. This means that those humans have developed arts that allow them to perform close combat well above and beyond their normal capacity. There have been stories of these artists besting other species in combat that should have every advantage over humanity. This, in combination with kinetic linking, allows humans to turn even their bodies into lethal weapons. He gestured at the 2 images behind him. One of these is a normal human civilian, capable of throwing a solid object at speeds high enough to cause significant injury, and who can run for longer than any other species that has achieved FTL within the Federation. The other is a trained combat artist, capable of doing all of that, as well as outfighting nearly any foe in unarmed combat the Federation could muster. On your pads, I would like you to indicate which is which. The students looked at each other. Surely this was a trick question. One of them was clearly the prime specimen of humanity. The other was an old man. There was a few moments before the lecturer noted all the choices were made. Well, I am not surprised that most of you chose this human. He gestured to the larger human. The correct answer is the other human. This is a common misconception made about humans, that their elder ones are frail and weak. It is better to assume that as humans get older, they replace the need for strength with knowledge. The older a human is, the more time they've had to learn. The class looked shocked. They knew humans matured from their adolescent state and grew stronger and displayed sexual dimorphism. But to learn that they never stopped gaining in ability was slightly shocking. With the introduction of Federation tech, humans could live almost 300 years. If a human that was considered old before, that was capable of outfighting any of the Federation members in a one-on-one fight. Yes, you are correct. There are humans that participated in the Soul Wars who are still around. And knowing humanity, I suspect they are still thinking up new ways to fight. These are but a few reasons humans are to be considered always armed and capable of lethal combat. A few other reasons that are commonly known, just to remind you all, are the fact that humans can bite with enough force to cut through skin, and their saliva contains over 500 types of bacteria, about 300 of which are lethal to various members of the Federation. The fact that when consuming food that is toxic, they will project the acidic contents of their stomach up to 3 meters away from them. He glanced down at his notes, then up at the class. Again, the combination of horror, fear, curiosity, and the desire to learn more dominated their body postures and antennae position. He resisted the urge to rattle his own antennae, pleased as he was that his lectures were having this effect. Further reading will include the Kepler 3 incident. The next lecture will be on humans and cybernetics. There will be a guest lecturer joining us for that lecture. Class dismissed. End of chapter. Chapter 3. Humans don't die easily. The lecturer watched his class, apprehensive and excited. They'd done their research this time, and the conclusion they'd come to was that humans were insane. My part of this lecture will be rather short, he explained, and twitched his antennae, conveying his pleasure at not actually having to prepare anything for this topic. He opened the presentation, and the UV lights dimmed. Most Federation species cannot survive the loss of a limb through violence. Our species will lose too much fluid and become unable to move, as well as going into shock. The Korsk have significant issues due to their breathing orifices being on their upper arms. The Ordeed would simply lose hydraulic pressure and collapse. And with their diffused nerve system and brain, the Scythans would suffer brain damage. Humans, however, keep going. He moved on to the next slide, an image of a human missing an upper limb, seeming to be taking part in some kind of physical competition against other humans who were not lacking such limbs. Personally, I've seen humans with limbs missing continue fighting even while the wound is flesh. Humanity, being able to survive this, has developed various replacements for missing limbs. He moved on to the next slide. A collection of human prosthetics throughout the ages, starting with a simple hook all the way through to the more modern systems where the cybernetics were grafted to the nerves. A student raised his hands. Sir, is that a weapon? They replaced lost limbs with weapons. The student's voice shook, and his antennae were folded back in fear. The lecturer smiled, clicking in amusement. I think I should hand off to our guest lecturer, Colonel Gregor Vanaheim. The lecture hall was suddenly frozen. They'd all heard the stories, legends, really. The iron-hearted captain, the human with a steel soul. Some of the remaining religious organizations in the Federation had him down as some kind of blessed or cursed creature. Gregor Ironheart Vanaheim, the man who had led a squad of 20 men and crushed the Federation's lunar base without losing a single trooper. What they knew was shockingly not what they expected. A human with short white hair and a withered face. He looked late 60s. He wore a human military uniform, medals of honor pinned to it. Walking onto the stage from the side, they could only really see his left side. He looked utterly normal. Greeting the lecturer, he smiled, exchanged pleasantries, and then turned to face the assembled student recruits. There was a collective straightening of antennae in surprise and confusion. The upper right part of his face was metal. His eye was also artificial. It wasn't a normal artificial implant that simply looked like a normal eye, but rather had several complex lenses housed in a boxy structure. He didn't address the class right away, but rather took off his dress jacket. Under it, he wore a button-up shirt with short sleeves. The class, at this point, was leaning forward to get a better view. Both of his arms were mechanical, heavy with armor plating and clear mounting points for more, or possibly guns. The cybernetics disappeared into his sleeves. This was him. The man that was more metal than man. The ones closest to the front could see in the armor on his arms tiny marks, like the honor marks on the lecturer's carapace. They'd heard of this human ritual amongst human soldiers. Each tiny scratch was a foe the human had slain. A few recoiled, realizing that every surface had marks on it. Vanaheim spoke, and the spell was broken. The class, suddenly realizing that he was here to teach them, showed the appropriate amount of respect. To answer your question, yes. Humans often include extra things into their prosthetics, not just weapons. His tricle was fluent enough that they didn't need their universal translators. Still, his voice was gruff and jovial. For example, he tapped the prosthetic eye on its side, the clinking of metal loud in the silence. This allows me to see in the normal wavelengths of humans, the ultraviolet of he caught himself, tricle, as well as infrared. It has lots of other functions. He took the controls for the presentation and pressed a button. The next slide appeared. It looked to be a simple diagram of a human. To save questions, I'll answer them all here. Yes, I have a prosthetic heart. A flechette round took my old one. My lung as well. There was another ripple of shock. Humans could replace their hearts. Was there no part of the human that could simply replace with a machine? The eye was a near miss with a plasma weapon. The class could understand the damage, but at the same time, why would any creature continue fighting after that? It was insanity. I can't remember what took the limbs, at least what took which limb. One was lost to an ambush of some ordain during a Pan-Asian conflict. I know one leg was a particle gunshot. He paused and smiled at the class, seeming to enjoy the growing horror and fear that he was causing them. To most of them, any one of those ordeals would be career, if not life-ending. Yet, here he was standing before them, talking about them as if they were just what he'd had for the evening meal the day before. As he spoke, the diagram behind him lit up slowly, indicating areas on the kernel that had been replaced. A section of the head, all 4 limbs up to the main joints, his heart and left lung, a small section of his neck. Now, the topic I've been asked to teach you lot is humans and cybernetics during the Soul War. He tapped his fingers against the lectern, the rapid-fire thudding of metal on the plastic drawing attention back to the present. During what the Federation calls the Soul War, what we call the invasion of Earth, humans ended up facing an enemy that preferred to incapacitate rather than kill. At the time, we didn't know if this is some kind of irregular tactic to demoralize and overwhelm our support systems or what, but it meant we needed to find a solution. So we did what humans always do when we face something new. He smiled again. The students didn't like it when he smiled. They'd been told it was a display of friendly joy, but it reminded them far too much of the fact that the humans were predators. It also wasn't helped by the fact that the smile always came with a cold glare from one remaining eye. We came up with something new. Rather than just patching a trooper up and sending him home, we gave them bits that were stronger, faster, more reliable than normal human parts. He said and tapped his own arm. I was the first to volunteer for it. Had my arm replaced, then my heart. He said, looked around at the class. Turns out that normal humans can't keep up with an augmented trooper. So I got my own squad. Some general needed a name for us, so just use what my troops called me, Ironheart. We became the Ironheart Squad. He clicked onto the next slide. This one showed an image of a far younger-looking version of himself, along with 10 or so other men and women. It was set atop of what appeared to be a burnt-out Federation hover tank, in high spirits. Humans don't die easy. We refuse to die. See, when we get into dangerous situations, our body gives us a drug called adrenaline. Means we can't feel pain. We can also run faster and are stronger. He explained. The class glanced at one another, worried. Human bodies made a drug that makes humans even more dangerous. What's next? So if you end up in a war with humans, make sure you kill them, or they'll keep coming back. Now, this was in the second or third year of the Soul War, so there was another 6 or so years of ground fighting to go. He waved at the image. I had not had both my arms upgraded back then, he chuckled. Now you see, humans have this thing. We can get angry, and we can yell and say stupid things at each other, but we won't stay angry. We'll get over it and get on with life. His voice changed. No longer was it gruff and jovial. It was cold and carried a weight of all he'd seen. But what the Federation did, you didn't make humans angry. You made us hate. Now for humans, hate is very different. See, when you make humans hate, it don't go away. It'll stay a long while, decades. The class was nervous, afraid. No one had actually told them what had happened, and none of them knew. But whatever it was, they knew it would never happen again. And humans stop caring about things when they hate. Things like their own safety, or even what is right or wrong. See, when humans really, properly hate, they'll go to the ends of the galaxy to get you. He straightened up and smiled. But it wasn't you, Tricle, that did it. It was the Torsek that made the mistake. He finished. The lecture hall was frozen again. Torsek, the only species in the Federation that no longer had an origin planet. Humanity had seen to it. The part of the story they knew. The Torsek had done something. They'd broken humanity's rules so badly that humanity had turned the Torsek homeworld into a ball of ashen rock. Gregor smiled again. Now, when you tell a man who hates his enemy and can no longer fight, you can let him fight again. You get a man who is in it for revenge, not just for himself, but for every wrong done to all of his people. That's why you get people like my troops. He moved on to the next slide. This appeared to be a diagram of a prosthetic arm. But it's been a good, 190 years? He paused. All's forgiven. Now, modern cybernetics. These tend to have more bells and whistles than mine, but as you can see, they mimic the human form pretty well. We've found that doing weird things like extra fingers or such confuses the brain. So it's normally just a human hand with an extra stuff activated from the outside. Or in specific situations, this one, he gestured at the side, has an interface port and a computer stored in it, used by the Boffins. He said, looking at the class, as they all looked a little shell-shocked from his somewhat mad lecture. Now, I'm sure you've all seen the Olympics. We used to have a rule saying that those with prosthetics wouldn't compete with those without, because those would be at a disadvantage. He laughed, a short, barking laugh. We had to change that, because now people without cybernetics would lose. The class knew the noise was supposed to indicate mirth, but they weren't sure why this is funny. Now, I don't have much more to say on the topic of cybernetics and the Soul War. I have plenty of stories, but those aren't really lectures. So, any questions? There was a long silence before one of the students spoke up.
Miss Arnholtz, what did the Torsic do? It doesn't say in the notes.
The student was pale, afraid that asking the question would earn another outburst from the old human. However, Gregor smiled and seemed to perk up. Smart question, kid. See, in human culture, you're not allowed to attack non-combatants, people who don't want to or can't fight, kids, injured and the like. Well, when your planet is under attack, you send them somewhere safe. He was cut off by the lecturer suddenly. That is a topic of another lecture. Any further questions can be sent via extranet to myself. I'll forward the relevant questions to the Commander of Vanheim. After the 5th lecture, I'll be uploading a file with all questions answered. Questions will be anonymous. He turned to the Colonel. Thank you for providing this lecture. I believe it is human custom for the class to thank the guest. He asked and turned to the class. Please thank Colonel Vanheim for this lecture. In unison, the class thanked Gregor for teaching them. Gregor smiled, collecting his dress coat in the process. It was my pleasure, he told them. I'll be heading off then, he said, and walked back off to the raised platform the way he'd come, letting them see one last time his cybernetic eye. Once Gregor was out of sight, the lecturer continued. I hope you all found that lecture illuminating. Continuing on from where the good colonel left off, humans are capable of surviving almost anything short of decapitation or destruction of several critical organs all at once. He swapped back to his own perspective. The next lecture will cover the chronology of the Soul War and the first meeting between Federation peacemakers and human ambassadors. Class dismissed. Lesson 4. Humans take prisoners. The lecturer watched as his class came in through the doors. He seemed a little more rigid than normal, less excited. His antennae were resting forward slightly, apprehensive. The class noticed the other tricals sat at the back of the room, half hidden in the shadow of the holographic projector that was used to create the three-dimensional images of the presentation. I am glad the last lecture did not put you off overmuch, he started, not his normal animated self. Please be on your best behavior as we have a guest from the Federation. Second high of the historical records. He gestured to the shadowed figure. With the requisite introductions out of the way, he dimmed the UV lights and opened the first slide. Unlike prior lectures where it was pictures or videos, this one actually had data upon it. A simple 10-year timeline. The Soul War stretched for 15 years. However, the first 10 are the most critical. The final 5 were primarily the humans dealing with rogue elements of both sides. Human ambassadors met with Federation peacemakers several times throughout them. It was an unofficial meeting when the Federation issued its demands for humanity to surrender. Humanity, however, responded with what they called the middle finger. The first official time was after 3 years after the first deployment of humanity's forbidden weapons. The second time was after 7 years to discuss the actions of Federation rogue elements. The class politely remained silent, but there was some glancing at one another. The Federation didn't have rogue elements. Maybe 1 or 2 piratical organizations or smugglers, but what Interstellar Empire didn't, and the Federation never involved any of them in wars. The third time was after 10 years when the Federation formally withdrew from Terran space. Although there was no declaration of cessation of hostilities, the final time was at the end of the war when humanity delivered notice to the Federation that it had finished cleaning up any rogue elements involved and was willing to negotiate a peace treaty. As the lecturer spoke, the timeline behind him lit up, indicating each time humanity and the Federation had peace talks, as well as some other notable events. Earth invaded was one, Federation lunar base lost another. He moved on to the next slide. As I have mentioned previously, humanity has rules for war. One of these is mercy. If an enemy surrenders or is incapable of fighting, you may not kill them. Rather, they have to be captured and kept in a secure location until the end of fighting. The Federation was not aware of this, so when a force was defeated and units lost due to enemy action, we were under the impression all troops were KIA. This is important for the first meeting, he explained. The class nodded. In the near 2 centuries since the war, the taking of prisoners of war had become part of the Federation doctrine. The slide that was now behind him was one of what looked like a collection of human dwellings. They were, however, surrounded on all sides by heavy-duty wall and several guard posts. Between the dwellings were several Tricul and Torsek, as well as a single Ordine. This is a human prisoner of war camp, or POW camp from the Soul War. According to the reports from captured troopers, they were treated well, given food to their specification, provided primitive tools and entertainment. Their dwellings all contained comforts equal to or better than human soldiers. The humans even provided them with what was at first appeared to be a high-strength narcotics and addictive drugs in the form of caffeine and nicotine. It was later discovered, however, that these are consumed by humans with far lessened effects than Tricul or Ordine biology. A single cup of what the humans call coffee is close to an overdose level for a Tricul. However, a human can drink 10 cups in a day and not suffer a caffeine overdose. This practice was quickly halted after human xenobiologists noticed the problem. The students nodded. They'd all heard the rumors that the humans made some of the best drugs this side of Andromeda Galaxy, and few that were unmatched in the entire cluster. Humans, for all their fearsome abilities, also live by a unique creed. They will treat defeated or surrendered foes with respect and dignity, if you haven't broken their rules, and will expect the same treatment from their enemy to their surrendered men. He clicked onto the next slide. The slide was the image of a meeting table. On one side sat 2 Scythians wearing ceremonial gemstones that marked them as Federation peacemakers. On the other side sat 2 humans, 1 male and 1 female. Both wore suits. This is the first meeting between Federation peacemakers and human ambassadors. While the entire recording of the meeting is available, I will be only using excerpts, as the entire meeting is 4 1/4 demicycles long. The class winced. To be stuck in a meeting like that for almost a half cycle. At least most lectures were only 2 demicycles long. He clicked a button on the lector and a section of audio played. A human female voice started talking, while the universal translator converted her words into normal clicks and chitters. Of the Tricol, they could still hear her voice, firm and polite, behind it. In regards to the event with the village and the children, she was cut off by the sounds of the Scythian speaking. Behind the universal translator, the bubbling humming that the Scythians used to communicate was far quieter than the human voice.
We have already explained. There was a rogue element. The Federation had nothing to do with it.
An exasperated sigh from the human male. What my partner is trying to say, the human male cut in, is we are willing to exchange some of the prisoners we have. He was interrupted, this time by the sound of shock and spluttering from both Scythians. It sounded like someone snapping 2 wet fish together.
Prisoners? You have taken Federation troops hostage?
Came the voice of the other peacemaker, clearly shaken at the idea of such barbarity. The human female let out a snort of amusement. The universal translator translated it as, until I moved to indicate humor and derision.
Not hostage. They are treated well and given medical aid. Since they are unarmed and no longer a threat, we see no point in harming them. Once the war is over, they'll be released. We are suggesting, if you aid us finding these rogue elements, we will consider releasing them sooner, the female ambassador said, the derision and humor in her voice. We have no idea where they are,
came the response, almost too fast from the peacemakers, in unison. The human sighed, almost in unison. Then, I think we have a little else to discuss, the male human said. Both Scythians seemed to stumble a little.
So you will continue to use these, what did you call them, loiter missiles and angel's teeth?
Came the female human. The universal translator converted it to until I moved to indicate agreement.
Until we have the perpetrators or evidence of the Federation's attempt to prevent such actions happening, we cannot take your statements of them being rogue elements as fact.
Seeing as there are reports of similar events happening, we will restrict ourselves to loiter missiles, angel's teeth, and Fospex weapons as a show of goodwill. The sounds of chairs scraping and footsteps.
I do hope that next time we meet, circumstances will be more favorable. Good day. The Scythian seemed to sputter. We bid you goodbye, humans. We hope your primitive shuttle makes it down to your planet safely.
The human male voice responded, May you live in interesting times and come to the attention of those in authority. The recording ended with a click. The lecturer let the class take a few moments to make any notes they wanted before resuming the lecture. As you can see, humanity at the time had only just begun to use their forbidden weapons, and the rogue elements within Federation had already started to appear. His tone remained measured and unchanged, his antennae unmoving as he was forcing himself to remain calm and controlled. Humanity at the time had made sure to move all non-combatants away from the areas of fighting. One of humanity's rules is not to involve non-combatants in fighting. This is why such a meeting was possible. The ambassadors are considered non-combatants, as are the peacemakers. Thus, they could meet on neutral ground, an empty transport shuttle. He pressed a button and the image changed. It was the same location, but the humans handing over a small datapad. The recording resumed, the human male this time. It would seem that the Federation is unaware of the fact that humanity has certain rules of warfare. This datapad should contain them. The only reason you've seen use of loiter missiles and angel's teeth is because those rules have been broken. The peacemakers looked a little shocked. After a few moments, one of them spoke up. Rules? You regulate war? Why? They looked through the datapad as the humans explained, a very shortened version of why humanity had rules of war. The peacemakers spoke up afterwards. You mean those weapons aren't the limit of your capabilities? The human chuckled in response to the question. No, they are not. However, we do not wish to use them, as we consider them far too cruel to be used against reasonable foes. He sounded a little hesitant to call the Federation reasonable. The peacemaker responded, having finished going through the files. I cannot see any of these that the Federation could have broken, they said simply. The human female tapped her nails on the table. I'm afraid we have reports of one of your squads of Skadies. She was interrupted. Our what? Skadies. The ones with the lizard-like... Oh, right. They have scales, eat leaves and grass, 3 fingers. She paused, trying to come up with more description. Torsek. They call themselves Torsek human, the peacemakers informed her. Thank you. We have reports and evidence that a squad of Torsek troopers encountered a village of non-combatants, and upon becoming convinced that the village was somehow aiding the war effort, demanded they hand over their weapons and ammunition as well as food. When the village refused, the squad gunned down several children in cold blood. The recording seemed to fuzz and crackle as if it had encountered a data error. Then the voice of the peacemaker came through. I see, Ambassador. I can assure you that there are no such elements in the Federation force. Any such elements on the ground are rogue elements that have deserted the Federation force, and we are doing everything in our power to eliminate. The recording clicked off. The lecture resumed. As you can see, it was only after the rules had been broken that humanity made an attempt at explaining to the Federation what had caused the use of loiter missiles and angel's teeth. Unfortunately, those rogue elements were never captured till late in the war, and resulted in humanity escalating the use of their forbidden weapons. He explained and clicked to the next slide. It is still unclear whether the rogue elements were rebel forces from the human POW camps or something else. However, the sudden change in human weapons and tactics resulted in a far more brutal war than the prior 3 years had seen. The slide was a picture of a squad of 14, or the remains of them. Most of them were missing upper torsos or heads. Small craters around them indicated the use of angel's teeth. The next lecture will be covering the rogue elements along with collecting any further questions that you wish to be answered in the lecture notes. Class dismissed. Lesson 5. The Rogue Element. The lecturer watched his students. There was some conversation amongst them about the visitor last lecture, about the rogue elements, and about today's lecture. This lecture will be somewhat different. I'll ask all of you to turn off your recording devices, he started. This was unusual, very unusual. The lecturer put a small device on his lectern. The 2 students taking electronic warfare class recognized it as a counter-recording device. Even if someone left the recording device on, all they would get was white noise and static. There are 2 parts to this lecture, he began. No slide behind him this time. The Federation-approved lecture, and the lecture that has been put together from hidden archives, humanity's recordings, and first-hand accounts. I will start with a Federation-approved lecture. He finally opened the first slide, showing a human village. During the Soul Wars, humanity moved all non-combatants to small villages, out of the way and as far away from the fighting as possible. However, as combat became more widespread and more skirmish-based in nature towards the end of the second year, there were small brushes up against these villages on accident. Most of the Federation species did not care, nor did they approach. However, despite the several Torsek squads approaching the human non-combatants' domiciles, as far as the Federation knows, this was because they were under the impression that they were providing supplies to human forces in the area. It is unclear if this is true. He paused and shifted on his legs, looking somewhat uncomfortable. When the humans refused to give up the supposed military forces that they were supporting, the Torsek attempted to force the humans to reveal the location of the military forces. In total disregard for orders, this force came in the threatening of the human spawnlings, culminating in the execution of several of the human spawnlings. Once knowledge of this reached the orbital command, the force command declared the Torsek squad a rogue element, striking them from the record and preventing them receiving any further support, or even evacuation off-planet. This small group of Torsek started to gather other Torsek who were displeased with the Federation's inaction towards these hidden supply bases, as they claimed they were, slowly building a moderate rogue element big enough to cause problems for both the humans and Federation. He changed the slide. This slide showed what was clearly a Federation base. However, it looked empty, and it was filled with spectral blue-white glowing lights. As these rogue elements grew and caused further issues, humanity continued to make use of more and more of the forbidden weapons they had locked away over the centuries. We were not fully aware of what humanity had made to fight one another, till it was used to fight us. Humanity had its own rogue elements, while the ambassadors had indicated that they would not use more than they had already shown with the 3 forbidden weapons. It seemed as though the rogue Torsek forces broke further rules. Humanity used far more terrible weapons. He gestured to a photo behind him. His antennae were oddly settled, as if he was somewhat between telling a lie and unwilling to speak. Humans did not seem to care if they were targeting rogue elements or official Federation bases with their weapons. The humans claimed this was the work of rogue elements on their side. He moved his antennae in a motion that was the triangle equivalent of a shrug. He waved his arm up at the photo behind him. This is a Phosphex, a human forbidden weapon. It is a cluster munition that humans developed to be used against heavy armor. It is a far more advanced version of a human chemical called phosphor. Once lit, Phosphex cannot be put out. Humans have assured us it can if exposed to the void of space. It'll eat through metal. The heat will shatter ceramic and laminate armor. Flesh and bone and carapace melt like ice cream in the sun. This would not be a significant problem if it was simply rained, as phosphor once was. Phosphex floats in the air, spraying down anything over a size that moves in the area. Thus, when humans bomb an area with it, the area becomes functionally uninhabitable until all the Phosphex orbs have been triggered or burnt out, which takes upwards of 6 weeks. He paused again, looking at his glass. The humans call it ghost lights, for each light is a death waiting to happen. The next line clicked up. This one showed over 50 large whale-bellied transport ships with a bright red cross on them and a strange winged stick with 2 long, thin, legless creatures wrapped around it. As this war of horrors grew, the rogue elements of the Torsek forces stopped targeting civilian populations, at least in mass, and rather would take 1 or 2 individuals and create gruesome displays with them. This changed as we entered the 7th year. Humanity, tired of the attacks on their civilian population, had prepared a safe location off-world. The Federation were unaware of it at the time, only becoming aware of it long after the Soul War. It is what is now known as Station Earth. They'd all heard of Station Earth, a titanic and ever-growing space station that followed the same orbits as Earth, but was on the opposite side of the sun at all times. It was the closest any non-human got to Earth after the Soul War. It was also the main trade hub of the Sol system and the diplomatic heart of the human coalition. The Tolsec rogue forces targeted these ships. He gestured at the huge ships behind him. They had raided Federation supply bases several days before, stealing anti-lander weaponry. Even the lecturer's antennae showed incredulity and disbelief at the statement. These shuttles contained over 80% of humanity's non-combat population. The rogue elements destroyed all but one. He paused. The rogue elements then transmitted a demand for surrender to the human forces on their own volition. There was a much longer pause. Humanity was not pleased. We did not know that humanity had been very restrained on the forbidden weapons they had used so far. Nothing that could not be considered truly, as the humans called it, uncontrollable and unavoidable had been used. He moved on to the next slide. This one was of another Federation groundside base, bloated corpses littering the ground. All species had one thing in common. They were leaking a blue-colored liquid from their mouths. It was after this action of the Tolsec rogue element that humanity attempted another meeting with the Federation. This was far less of an attempt at diplomacy. It appeared that the ambassadors that had arrived the first time had either left or had been killed by the rogue element. I shall not be going over all the details. However, it had 2 or 3 main points. The humans' warning to the Federation to leave human space and let them deal with the rogue elements, or all of the Federation would be considered a rogue element. The Federation insisted that the only sensible choice was for humanity to surrender, and let the Federation help them rebuild and hunt down these rogue elements. And the human ambassador telling the Federation peacemakers that their female parent must have fornicated with a beast of burden to have caused them to be so mentally damaged, and that the peacemakers themselves should perform oral pleasure on their male parent. The lecturer chuckled. That is where the Federation-sanctioned lecture ends. However, for those of you who wish to know what the humans believe happened, based on first-hand accounts, gathered evidence, and what is believed to be the information hacked from Federation archives, you are welcome to stay. He moved on to the next slide. This one was of a Federation task force. Tolsec foot soldiers at the front of 2 hover tanks backing them up. This is a photo provided by a human scout. This is one of the supposed rogue elements. If you look here, he waved his UV pointer at a section in the background. It is easy to see a Federation shuttle ramp. This photo was taken just outside one of the human settlements. This photo, combined with other evidence, including what is claimed to be a Federation datapad with orders from Fleet Command, has led the humans to believe that these atrocities, as the humans call them, were perpetrated on orders from High Command, thus the use of forbidden weapons on all enemy combatants. He moved on to the next photo. This one, a collection of grisly corpses, human bodies that looked to have been flayed open and skinned before being pinned up on wooden boards. Supposedly, according to transmissions and recordings that were hacked from Federation data vaults, there were members of the Force Command that were under the impression that the reason humanity had these rules to prevent certain ways of fighting was because humanity was weak to those tactics, or they would make the humans surrender. Thus, those tactics were prosecuted. He stopped for a moment and allowed the class to catch up. There was a frantic note-taking and whispered conversations. Once the hall had fallen silent again, he resumed. They were wrong. We found that humanity did not outlaw these methods of war because it made them weak. They outlawed these methods of warfare because it made them unstoppable. Where before a force could break a human line and force them to fall back, or an attack would falter and retreat. After the supposed rogue elements destroyed the civilian transports, the way humans waged war changed. There was no taking prisoners, no surrender available to Federation troops. According to human records, they had previously been fighting to defend their homeworld, and that had made them more stubborn and brutal than they normally were. But when the transports were destroyed and they were fighting to annihilate those that dared to do such a thing, and for vengeance, he moved on to the next slide. This was a picture of a section of ground that looked less like a planet and more like an asteroid. This is an example of a human forbidden weapon that was used. What you are looking at as the remains of a Federation forward operating base. The glass shifted in shock. Remains. There wasn't a hint that anything had ever existed there. The humans made use of an owl. This was the first time the Federation saw use of such a weapon, he explained. He seemed somewhat more comfortable now that they'd moved away from what the Federation-mandated lecture was. That is all for this lecture. Please email me your questions via the extranet. I will be emailing you the answers to your questions halfway between this lecture and the next. The next lecture will cover the ignorance of the Jupiter shipyards and how that led to a forced retreat to the Federation fleet. End of lesson. Chapter 5.5, Lecture Notes 1 through 5. The Soul War History Student Recruits. Below are the questions I've been asked after the lectures or via extranet mail. They are answered in no particular order. I hope these help with note-taking and additional research. I'll also take this opportunity to remind the class, this is not an exam-based course, but you'll be graded on coursework. I expect your first drafts to be submitted before next lecture. What are angel's teeth? Angel's teeth are a human weapon, banned due to the fact that they can be highly indiscriminate. In principle, they are a small blade of material no more than 15 centimeters in length, with an extra 3 centimeter of control fins at the end, dropped from high in the atmosphere, either from a flying vehicle, a ship in low orbit, a missile, or even deployed by a satellite. They lock on to a pre-programmed mission. In the Soul War, the humans locked them onto a specific frequency of the Federation used for communication. Due to the extreme velocities reached, the high accuracy and air friction heating the blade itself became a highly effective armor-penetrating dart that is capable of punching through most non-armored buildings and most armored vehicles and devastating soft tissue. This, combined with the tiny size and high speed, makes it very hard to intercept. Humans outlawed it due to the fact that it deployed in an area with any civilians or non-combatants, it is highly possible for them to be caught in the lock-on. The examples humans give is that their civilian communication devices can output the same frequency signals as their military communication devices. Can humans replace their brain with cybernetics? Well, it is possible. A large portion of the human population, 95%, dislike replacing any of their brain with machinery. While most of them have some kind of implant or additional augment to their central nervous system, such as a universal translator or other day-to-day tools, very few are willingly to replace any part of their brain with cybernetics. The most common claim is that they feel less human and not themselves. Of the remaining 5%, almost all of these have small cerebral cybernetics, either due to work, such as military pilots making use of direct neural interface or such, or to enhance basic functionality, such as the optic memory core to record everything they see perfectly. There is, however, a tiny fraction of humanity that is fanatical about these upgrades, replacing as much of themselves as possible. How do humans handle mental trauma compared to the Federation species? Humans are a highly diverse species. Some humans, like Colonel Vanaheim, appear to be almost immune to mental trauma, shrugging off traumatizing events as if they mean nothing. In other cases, humans have been known to suffer such bad mental trauma that they cannot function in normal society. In this regard, it is hard to place humanity on a scale of mental resilience. For example, most humans would be less resilient than an Ordine to mental trauma. However, there are some humans who would laugh at the things that would make an Ordine want to hide in its nesting web for the rest of its life. What actions were taken to piss off the humans? I applaud the use of human phrase. I do, however, wish to remind students to keep such phrases to appropriate class, or amongst friends. As mentioned in Lecture 4 and 5, rogue elements of Tolsec broke rules set forth by humanity to ensure the war did not cause undue harm to those not involved. What ended the war? Since we'll be covering the Federation withdrawal from Terran space in our lectures, I'll not be specifically covering that. However, the Soul War officially ended 5 years after that, when humanity had finished dealing with the rogue elements and ensuring no further breaches to their rules would take place. This also involved humanity recapturing specific rogue elements that continued to prosecute the war against the Tolsec, claiming vengeance for the actions the rogue elements took during the war before the Federation withdrawal.
How did you manage to catch up with the Federation with regards to interstellar warfare? I am unable to answer this question personally. However, I forwarded it to a university naval warfare professor. His response is as follows. Humanity had a highly different approach to interstellar warfare to the Federation. The Federation made use of plasma, ion, and particle weapons. The optimum ranges of these weapons before energy dissipation and traversal time rendered them ineffective. Thus, most Federation interstellar battles prior to Soul Wars were prosecuted at ranges of 4,000 to 6,000 kilometers, primarily using ships of a moderate size to maintain a suitable combination of firepower and maneuverability for all ships. Terran warfare, however, was highly different. The Terran battle fleet functioned in two very different manners. First was the humanity calls the front line. This is the line of mixed-size ships, super-heavy dreadnoughts of immense firepower and armor. This provides the Terran fleet with immense survivability. These dreadnoughts often carry with them interceptors, tiny 1- or 2-man ships that are made to slip past enemy defenses and shields, damaging critical components. Mixed in with these dreadnoughts are the ships of the line. These are ships of tonnage closer to our own cruisers. These can have any array of weapons, or even tactical support devices aboard, ranging from electronic countermeasure devices to advanced targeting systems to aid with the real-line ship support. All of the ships, however, are armed to some degree. Most of the dreadnoughts are armed with a spinal weapon, titanic weapons mounted along the entire spine of the ship. Those that are not replace it with an even larger launch base for more fighters and bombers. The human term for these ships are fleet carriers, an apt name. The human armament for the frontline ships consisted of kinetic weapons in the form of coiled guns, chemical propellant weapons, both unguided and guided missiles, and rail guns. The Federation ships built to turn away ionized energy blasts and particle weapons were shockingly ineffective against such measures. Humanity lacking shields, at least till the 8th year of the Soul War, meaning that only the dreadnoughts could withstand Federation weapons. The human fleet had two further lines. An array of what humanity called picket ships, which we were told were supposed to prevent any breakthroughs from reaching the real line support ships. They were, however, never needed due to the resilience of humanity's dreadnoughts. The real line ships were called support ships. We at first assumed this meant that they carried the ammunition and Reaper drones for the frontline ships. While this was true, it was not their primary function. They were primarily what humanity called destroyers, lacking armor or any real defenses beyond the picket ships and some interceptor fighters. The destroyer's main role was to provide unparalleled firepower to human forces. This line of ships sat well beyond 10,000 kilometers away from the humans' front line. They were armed with railguns and directed energy weapons. The railguns, unlike the spinal weapons of the destroyers, were not meant for close combat. Unable to fire rapidly or use large cluster-based submunitions. They, however, had such high acceleration that each shot covered the distance between human rear lines and the front lines in just over a second. The devastation of such firepower was terrifying. The directed energy weapons were also irregular. Rather than firing plasma or particles, the human energy weapons rather unleashed coalesced light at such high frequencies that it superheated the outer hull of a ship, causing it to either suffer a system failure or lose the ability to participate in the fight meaningfully. The Federation forces only succeeded in pushing through the human fleet due to the fact that the human fleet was outnumbered and they had no defenses against plasma and particle weaponries beyond sheer thickness of armor. The human fleet was forced to pull back and retreat from Earth. However, they would launch raids against any ship that remained in orbit of Earth for too long. Thus, neither fleet could gain true orbital superiority, at least till the 8th year. What happened to the Torsek home planet? Several of you asked me this question in various forms. Several human rogue elements took it upon themselves to take revenge for the atrocities committed by the Torsek rogue elements. While the Federation fleet was still recovering from the Soul War, the human rogue elements jumped into the Torsek home system and overwhelmed the local defense fleet. Once they had established orbital superiority, they seeded the atmosphere with various fissile materials. The Torsek homeworld had an atmospheric composition of about 38% oxygen, with a further 12% ozone in the general atmosphere, ignoring the ozone layer. The human rogue elements took advantage of this and introduced various chemical primers to the atmosphere.
The seeding was done via deployment of several advanced cluster munitions. Once the seeding was complete, the rogue elements ignited the planet's atmosphere. Every living creature on the planet, every plant, every structure burned. The oceans boiled, and the water vapor was at such high temperature that it became unstable and split back into H2 and oxygen before burning away again. The free carbon in the atmosphere caused the free oxygen to become carbon dioxide. The rogue human elements then jumped away from the planet. The planet burned for half a solar cycle before finally dying away. Some Torsic attempted to survive in bunkers and shelters. However, the shelter's composite armor or the bunker's blast doors melted due to the temperature. No living creature survived on the planet, which is now a barren ball of ash, incapable of supporting life. What is an owl? An owl is an orbital weapon lancet. It is a general name humans give to their orbital weapon delivery system. A orbital satellite has several large lancets mounted on it. Hollow tubes that can be loaded with any munition the humans see as suitable. These may range from angel's teeth to be deployed into the upper atmosphere to simple chemical explosives that go off when the lancet impacts with the ground. In the image that was made use of in the lecture, the munitions the humans deployed was a cluster munition, with each bomblet containing a hyper-low-yield nuclear warhead. This effect was localized and devastating. Owls themselves were not outlawed, however a large portion of the warheads made for them were. What do humans call other species? Another question I am unable to ask. However, I have passed the question over to the xenolinguists professor, and the response I got was as follows. Humans have a habit of giving other sapient species nicknames after flora and fauna of their home planet. For example, they call the trical lobsters due to our large claws, hardened outer shells, and antennae. However, human lobsters are red in coloration, unlike our own, by human coloring, brown coloration. The following list is from my own research in human colloquialisms. Ordine tend to be referred to as sex or bugs, which appears to be shortening of insects, or the colloquial term for such creatures. This is likely due to their compound eyes and exoskeletal structure. Shockingly, Ordine and human insects use the same motor functions for larger limbs, with hydraulic pressure being part of the musculature. Scythians are often called jellies or slugs due to their lack of hard exoskeletal structure and semi-liquid nature. This, combined with their method of locomotion, makes them akin to terran mollusks. However, human mollusks are a solid brown color rather than the semi-translucent oranges and reds of the Scythians. Korsks strangely lack any unified nicknames amongst humans. This may be because of their semi-humanoid appearance with 2 arms and 2 legs. However, the most common term for them is bendies. This is likely due to the fact that the Korsk species do not have joints in the same manner as humans, but rather have sections of their body where their bones are connected by highly flexible tissue membranes, thus making them hyperflexible when compared to humans. These are the most common names for the sapient species within the Federation. Individual humans, however, are likely to have their own names for each individual they personally know. How much of the human population survived the war? This specific number of survivors is unknown. However, it is estimated that 25% survived. A large portion of that population was within the Jupiter orbital ring, which were primarily ship engineers and research crew. The remaining population was split between the military population that survived on Earth and Mars and Station Earth, which housed the remaining non-military population. At the end of the Soul War, it is estimated that more than 40% of human population were either military or military-associated. It is worth noting, however, the population of Jupiter's orbital ring alone numbered in the several billion. It is estimated that the number of casualties lost in the actions of the rogue elements number in the tens of billions. In the 2 centuries that followed it, it is believed that humanity expanded rapidly, making use of the space they had and incentivizing large birth rates. Currently, humanity is considered to have recovered from such an atrocity. They, however, show no inclination to slow down their current growth. What is humanity's current relationship with the Federation? The Unified Conglomerate of Human Systems, or the UCHS, currently operates under a truce with the Federation. The terms of this truce leave room for individuals or corporations to strike their own trade agreements. However, there is a hard military boundary between the two. It has been over a century since a human military vessel entered Federation space.
and over a century and a half since a Federation military vessel entered the UCHS space. What was the Federation's goal when invading the Sol system? The Federation's initial goal was not an invasion, as any student should be aware. The Federation First Officer's invitation to any fledgling FTL species to become a vassal for the Federation for a few centuries before gaining full membership and being permitted a seat at the Council, all while being protected by the Federation from other stellar empires that would want to exterminate a fledgling species for one reason or another, only resorting to invasion when threatened, as they were in the case of the humans. However, this has only occurred a few times in Federation history, and each time it was only a few solar cycles before the fledgling species saw the logic and intelligence of joining the Federation. Best regards, military history lecturer Raegar. This extranet mail, and together with its attachments, is for exclusive and confidential use of the addressees and may contain legally privileged information. Any use, disclosure, or reproduction without the sender's explicit consent is unauthorized and may be unlawful. Any email content, including any attachments, may be monitored and used by the Federation for reasons of security and for monitoring compliance with the Federation's policy. End of chapter. Lesson 6. Humans have their own monsters. The lecturer watched his class file in. They looked apprehensive. Several were holding custom datapads, devices only attached to the Federation network via an extranet. I am glad that you got your drafts into me, though there are few of you clearly only started work after I emailed you. For this lecture, will you be skipping towards the end of the Federation involvement in the war? To the 8th year, when the Federation fleet was first routed. He shook his head. The class looked at one another. The Federation fleet routed. It was unheard of. But then again, this entire series of lectures had a lot of that. They put it down to humans being impossible again. The lecturer opened the first slide. The image was a red and orange gas giant. Around it sat a huge orbital ring. A picture-in-picture image showed that the orbital ring was some kind of shipyard. These are the shipyards at Jupiter, the largest planet in the Sol system. When the Federation first arrived in the system, Jupiter was on the far side of the Sun to Earth and did not appear to offer aid to the Terran forces. Thus, the Federation put them down as a neutral party. The Federation was wrong. So wrong, in fact, that this could be considered the definitive reason that the Federation lost the war. These dockyards were the main source of human ships. However, when the Federation arrived, they stopped production. They appeared to be waiting and watching for whoever would win the fight, so the Federation ignored them. A live and let live attitude. So long as they didn't supply Earth forces like Mars and Luna had, then they would be left alone, expected to surrender after Earth had fallen. He clicked on the next slide. This was an image of a huge ship under construction. Even for a human capital ship, it was immense. A Federation cruiser could sit in its hull and have room to maneuver. The orbital ring did not, however, fall silent. Rather, they seemed to enact a plan that humanity had either been in the process of doing themselves or had set up for this very instance. The orbital ring was, and still is, self-sustaining, capable of mining all it needs to produce ships from Jupiter and its surrounding moons. A human dreadnought takes a team of 100,000 humans 5 or 6 years to build. The orbital ring shipyards were capable of pumping out thousands of ships a year. Humanity had never used this capacity simply because they never needed that many ships, rather than build a second fleet. The humans decided that they would pour every resource they had into 4 ships. 4 ships. The lecturer shook his head, as if the idea of building such a thing was insane. An entire orbital ring of shipyards, stock workers, engineering crews, and production facilities, normally used to make entire human fleets, turned towards making 4 ships. Over the course of 8 years, they stripped several moons down to nothing, providing them for raw resources. They even cannibalized some parts of the orbital ring itself. He clicked forward onto the next slide. This slide showed an image of another Titanic ship being built. This one had a very different structure to the last.
The Federation, having written the orbital ring off as a non-threat, paid no attention to it, leaving Jupiter unmolested to continue its work unabated. The first the Federation knew of these ships was when they joined the battle of Earth at the midpoint of the 8th year. He pressed a button on the controls, and what was clearly a recording of a bridge crew's conversation started to play.
Admiral, we have 4 unknown ships approaching the fleet. Their path indicates their origin point was the orbital ring around the gas giant, sir.
Admiral, the humans are broadcasting on all frequencies, came the addition from what was likely a communications officer. Further scanning on those ships. Put the humans through, the Admiral ordered. I see you have decided to... The Admiral began to speak, only to be cut off by a roar from the speakers. Whatever was being transmitted was so loud that it caused the bridge crew to emit noises of pain and discomfort. The horsemen! Right. What in the name of the council does that mean? The captain shouted at the partly deafened crew. The recording cut off as the lecturer paused it. The Federation has only heard those words twice. This was the first time. The second time was a warning when the Federation military fleet accidentally crossed into human space. He paused as he moved on to the next slide. His antennae made it clear how he felt about this level of accidentally involved. A new slide showed 4 images of strange creatures, clearly no creature that existed in this universe. In human mythos, there are supposedly 4 legendary beings that'll appear at the end of all existence. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, harbingers of the end. He gestured at the images. This is a depiction of them. Humans decided to name these 4 ships after those 4 legendary creatures. An apt moniker considering the size and destructive power of such a ship, let alone 4 of them. He indicated to the first image, a white warrior atop a fine steed carrying a mighty spear. Conquest, the domination of all things. The next image was a mighty warrior clad in red and black metal armor, carrying a flaming sword in one hand. The creature he rode upon was a black with glowing red eyes. War, the harbinger of destruction and violence, master of bloodshed. The third image showed an emaciated creature with sunken lips and blood-stained teeth atop a mount that looked as if it had never eaten, bones showing through the skin, a pallid, sickly light in its eyes. Pestilence, the foul rot and sickness that eats and all living things, to die from unseen foes. Finally, reaching the 4th image, the rider had no face. Astride a pale mount, skeletal fingers extended from a black robe to clutch a scythe. Death, the end, the final and ultimate end. It is these 4 creatures that the humans named their mightiest warships after, to not only represent what they were to the humans, but to teach every other species that to inflict such heinous atrocities upon humans as the rogue elements did was to invite the 4 horsemen of the end times down upon them. He inclined his antennae in what passed as a sigh amongst tricol. The humans made their most dreaded legend manifest, and used it to fight the Federation, he said as he moved on to the next slide. A huge ship, bulky and box-like, it was ugly and raw. There was no grace in its lines. It was unpainted except for highlights, the color of human blood, and 3 human letters painted on its side. Next to it was a silhouette of a Federation cruiser. They knew that human dreadnoughts outsized Federation main battle cruisers by 2 or 3 times, but this was insane. The cruiser was at most a 10th the size of the Titanic war machine. This is war, the first of humanity's super capital class ships, provided for context as a Federation cruiser. What we know about these ships is from first-hand accounts from survivors of the Soul War and black box recordings. He pressed a button, and the human super capital ship slowly started to rotate to give the students the full image. On the front of the ship's bow was an iconography of a flaming sword, the same sword they had seen carried by the creature in the image. All of the human super capital ships function as fleet carriers, super heavy weapons platforms, and short-range capable ships. Each ship is capable of excelling in any role in a fleet. The common features across all 4 of these ships are the spinal weapons. though each ship is unique in the spinal weapon it carries. The humans at this point had also reverse-engineered Federation shield technology, meaning that these 4 ships had shielding comparable to our own, as well as armor thicker than any we had seen before. Each ship had also several dozen armored hangars for launching various smaller void craft. War's hangars were reported to generally carry heavier ships than most, multi-crew combat shuttles, heavy bombers, and landing craft. He paused to let frantic note-taking of the students slow down a little. The spinal weapon used by War appeared to be a coil gun, several dozen of them. From the battle recordings we have, it appears they fired sequentially. Each fires a solid slug with enough velocity and power to rip Federation cruisers apart. Federation scientists theorized that it could be used to pummel a city to rubble from high orbit. War carries enough of these coil guns to never need to stop firing. Each gun has cooled down sufficiently by the time the one just before it fires. War, however, seems to only carry solid shot and explosive munitions. He moved on to the next slide, a different ship. This one was long and flat, wide as well. It looked like a sword blade. This ship was painted in a gold and white livery. The emblem on her side, a decorated glowing spear. Human lettering along her side, probably a name. Conquest, unlike War, the ship carries only a single spinal-mounted weapon. The first and only relativistic speed weapon humanity ever made. In the first engagement, it only fired twice. Once in the opening volley, and once to ensure that the flagship of the Federation fleet did not survive. Her hangars generally carry all-purpose fighter bombers, made for filling any role within the sphere of combat. The class looked at each other. The theory of relativistic kinetic weapons was well known, but to put it into practice as a ship-mounted weapon was insane. If fired at a planet, it could erase all life on the planet. The next ship replaced Conquest, fat and heavy with a bifurcated bow. It looked stubby and rough around the edges. Whereas War simply looked brutal in its construction, it looked as if something had eaten away the edges of the ship. Painted in an off-white and various greens, the ship looked rotten and foul. The insignia was one of a human head, skin shrunken and decayed, hollow eye sockets crying blood. Pestilence! The spinal weapon of this ship is similar to War. However, she only has 3 coil guns. The ship makes up for that by carrying a huge collection of variable submunitions. We have seen several. Cluster munitions that carry nanomachines that rip apart whatever ship they hit to make more of their kind. Low-velocity munitions that deploy into loiter missiles or other such weapons. Proximity-based munitions that explode with nuclear fire. Pestilence carries enough waste to deliver death that the Federation is confident that we have not seen them all. He looked down at his notes, reassuring himself that nothing he said was incorrect. Unlike the prior 2 ships, Pestilence does not carry manned fighting vehicles. Rather, it carries a very large collection of combat drones. We have seen humans use drones before. However, they did not use them in the void combat as the reaction times for the human operators were delayed due to transmission time. These drones, however, appear to be autonomous, and rather than being armed with weapons, they would latch onto enemy ships and use laser cutting tools to rip chunks off of them. If attacked, they would latch onto the attacker and explode. He clicked on to the next slide, containing the final ship. Unlike the others, this ship was not decorated. Even its running lights were muted in color. Painted matte black, it seemed to defy visual definition, looking more like a hole in space than anything else. It looked like a needle or a dagger, tapered to a point and sharp no matter what angle you saw it from. Across the upper section of its bow, seeming to emerge from a shadow filled from the ship, was the icon, the hooded figure carrying its scythe in its skeletal hands. Something about this representation spoke to the class, carrying the weight of all mortal creatures with it. Its name was painted in bone-white color. Death, the lecturer broke the spell. Almost nothing is known about this ship, its hangar contents, its sub-weapons or support capacity. Unlike its 3 brothers, it did not engage in the fight overmuch, only firing a spinal weapon once. He clicked a button and the video started to play. The Federation fleet was in shambles. 3 Titanic warships hounded them away from Earth space, a 4th following close behind. The recording was clearly from either an escape pod or a life shuttle that was fleeing the combat. The 3 larger warships seemed to split apart, letting the black ship drift between them. The video slowed, clearly slowed down to allow the watcher to see each detail. The space between the 4 ships and the Federation fleet seemed to glitter before the film whited out, overexposed due to something. When the recording recovered, the Federation fleet had a slice taken out of it, as if some titanic blade had just come down and cut away the space the fleet inhabited. The recording ended, and the image of the warship returned. This is the only recording we have of Death's spinal weapon firing. The only information provided by humanity when asked about it was the weapon's name, the Reaper's Scythe. Our researchers believe it is some kind of particle or directed energy weapon of such power that it is capable of vaporizing any ship caught in the blast, shield or not. The glittering was the weapon impacting on debris, space dust, and the like. In theory, in deep space with no debris, there would be no way to tell the weapon had fired until it struck. The only saving grace appears to be the time it takes for the weapon to recharge or reload, as after this Death fell back, returning to its backline support position. The lecturer paused as he moved on to the next slide. This image was of Earth at a distance, sitting in orbit over it with 4 supercapital-class ships, a constant threat. As far as we know, these 4 ships have not left the Sol system since the Sol War, guarding the humans' home system. In the 2 centuries since the Sol War, no species has built a warship of comparable size. Even humanity hasn't come close. The biggest of their dreadnoughts now being 50% the size of the 4 horsemen. He closed the notes on his datapad and looked at the class. That is all for this lecture. Class dismissed. Lesson 7. Humans do not surrender. The class walked into the classroom. There had been some discussion about what they would be learning today, as the lecturer hadn't let them know at the end of the last lecture. The lecturer stood, going over his notes. He seemed a little distracted as the class walked in. I am glad that you all have made it. I have reviewed your drafts and will be sending you suggestions after this lecture. He opened the first slide, a rust-red planet with patches of green and spheres of white across the surface. This is Sol 4, or as the humans call it, Mars. This was the other major ground-based battlefront during the Sol War. Unlike Earth, the fighting was not scattered across the entire planet. And unlike Luna, where it was easy to blockade and prevent shipments from Earth, the Martian colonies were fully self-sustaining. This meant that rather than simply preventing supply shuttles to the Martian colonies, the Federation would have to take each colony individually, he said as he moved on to the next slide. This one was the inside one of the white-silver domes. From the inside, the dome was transparent, allowing people to see the Martian sky and the red deserts in the distance. Around the dome itself, there was a green as what appeared to be Terran plants grew. Rather than terraforming the entire Martian biosphere, the humans modified Terran plants to grow in the Martian soil and atmosphere. While this process is far slower than terraforming, the energy required and the effort needed is far less. He paused and glanced around the class. The class seemed a little surprised at the far calmer nature of the lecturer compared to the others. This also caused a curious case of stable bubbles, where around the Martian colonies there were small spheres of habitable space. The Martian colonies were not very heavily militarized. A few bases and outposts, but nothing like Earth. He moved on to the next slide. The image was of an overview of the city within one of the domes. The lecturer highlighted a small building towards the side of the city. This is the only building in one of the Martian cities. It is a small outpost mostly used to recruit new members of the human military force. It contains on average 5 to 12 human military personnel. This led the Federation was under the impression that this would make the Martian colonies easy to take. His antennae twitched, clearly amused. This was the first time meeting what humans call frontiersmen, humans that were trained and taught how to survive on the very fringes of what humans considered habitable. Please note, this is what humans consider habitable, not Federation species. He moved on to the next slide. This one depicted one of the cities. Sections of it were on fire, buildings were half destroyed, roads were potholed, the dome was smoke-stained, there were bodies scattered here and there. This is what the city looked like after 30 Terran cycles. The city at this point was still not considered secure. Civilian humans were still making things difficult for the Federation ground forces. The human resistance made use of everything from improvised explosives to homemade toxic gas. It is unclear how they produced this gas, but it did not prove lethal. Only a massive irritant to any exposed mucous membrane, eyes, olfactory systems, or respiratory systems, rendering most of the Federation's combatants incapacitated and unable to discern direction. Thus easy targets for civilians armed with melee weapons. Each time our forces developed a protocol or deployed a system to deal with the human resistance, another method of warfare was deployed. The Federation deployed respirators to deal with the toxic gas. The humans deployed smoke grenades that covered the visors in thick dust that blinded the troops. We started using IR sensors to spot the lasers the humans used to activate the trip mines. They started to use string of all things to set off the mine. We used thermal vision to spot the humans hiding in the bushes and rubble. They started to cover their faces in heat-reflecting substances. They suffered losses nonetheless. However, it was clear the method of warfare that we were using was costing our forces far more than intended. He moved on to the next slide. This slide contained an image of a large green bands around the edge of the dome covered in small plants of various kinds. This is what a dome looked like after we had taken control for a total of 3 years. Those plants you see all over the edges of the dome, the humans stole them from the hydroponics bay and started growing their own food. We took over their food supplies, so they started simply to grow more, as if we wouldn't attempt to simply burn it or prevent them from harvesting it. He inclined his antenna in a species version of a sigh. That is when we encountered the hungry grass. He moved on to the next slide. This one was of a large swath of waist-high grass. It appeared to be a simple and rather common plant that most humans enjoyed walking on. The lecturer used his UV pointer to indicate something in the corner of the image, hidden by the grass. Only visible, by dint of a single limb poking out of it, was the decapitated corpse of what appeared to be an Ordine. When questioned, human scholars explained that this grass was developed as an anti-intruder device. The grass itself is perfectly safe, so long as you are a registered person. Registering either requires being hard-coded into the grass's genes or having your own DNA mixed with a specific chemical substance and spraying the grass with it. When stored, before purchase, the grass carries a general human gene hard-coded in it to prevent any spillages from causing significant damage. Humans have also developed a specific chemical that kills the grass. Normally, the grass is not lethal, as most humans keep it cut short. However, when left to grow rampant, the grass can be deadly to almost any living creature. He paused. The class looked horrified. The humans turned their decorations into lethal weapons to discourage people from attempting to enter their houses. Humans were insane. As for what it does when brushing up against the grass, if you are considered registered, the grass does nothing. If you are not registered, it extends tiny spines, sharp enough to pierce normal clothing in most species. These spines carry a high-strength paralytic venom that will render most species unable to move. The grass will then very slowly drain the moisture from the creature. Normally, this process is so slow that it would take days for anyone to suffer any kind of adverse effects. However, when the grass is left to grow so large and so dense, it becomes fatal in a number of hours. When the invasion of some of the biodomes started, humans grabbed large amounts of these grass seeds and spread them everywhere and anywhere they could grow. Over the course of the years, the grass grew rampant and wild. He exhaled slowly and shook his head. He clicked onto the next slide. This one was an image of a group of humans, 3 of them, They wore green and grey clothing, their faces smeared with grey and dark green paints. Even their hair was cut short and covered in the same stuff. They were on their knees, glaring at the camera. Each of them had clearly been armed at one point. Blade sheaths at their sides or on their boots, and holsters for sidearms visible. These are 3 captured resistance fighters awaiting execution. Most humans on the Martian front seemed to fight to the death, even attempted to fight when their loss was a certainty. Several recorded incidents include humans blowing themselves and Federation troops up. Humans, it appears, honor and respect this tradition of stupidity and resistance to superior forces. He clicked the button, and the recorder started to play. We shall go on. We shall fight in France. We shall fight in the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. The recording stopped. This was part of a speech given by a human leader during one of their own wars. They had just been forced to retreat when defending their neighboring country, which had been overwhelmed in a mere 46 days. This was before humans had discovered radar, a country that was nearly 1,000 kilometers across, overwhelmed in 46 days. And this island was barely a quarter the size. Yet they insisted on fighting. Even before this, humanity had lionized and told stories about fighting on regardless. A human literary writer once published a work in which one of the most famous sections goes as follows. Then outspake brave Horatius, the captain of the gate, to every man upon this earth, death cometh sooner or late, and how can man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his father and the temples of his gods? As you can see, the assumption that the humans would surrender was an ill-fated mistake. He moved on to the next slide. This one was of a group of what appeared to be modern human military. Each of them had a patch on one sleeve, a small solid red circle, and with a laurel around it. As is typical with humans, despite fighting a losing war, they enshrined this valiant, albeit foolish defense of the biodomes in their history as a stand of the valiant few against an insurmountable odds. They have even left a few of the biodomes as they were after the war, and continue to train military forces in them despite Mars itself being mostly habitable at this point. The training is supposedly far harsher than normal military training. And those that pass whatever stringent tests that the humans set are permitted to join the human elite unit. In honor of the resistance, the humans call it the Sons of Mars. It is also somewhat shocking and a coincidence that the planet was originally named after the human god of war. He touched a data pad and held his notes, clearly changing page or searching for something. Returning to the Soul War, the Martian biodomes, well considered secured and a non-threat, were never truly taken over. Right up until the Federation withdrew, there were losses and skirmishes. The humans made use of anything and everything. They would launch an attack on our forces while a small force would steal our supplies. Their troopers would have almost everything stolen. The human resistance would drag the bodies back to wherever they were hiding, strip the body down of all its useful gear, and dump the body in the street on one of our patrol routes. Some of the troops started calling it doing the corpse walk. He moved on to the next slide. This time, the slide was an image of a Federation base with a strange flag draped across the walls and spray-painted here and there. The flag and symbol was the same, a red ring with a stylized human skull on it. He gestured at the image. This is what happens when the humans got hold of the Federation base. They would strip it of anything useful, set aflame, and dub it with the symbol of their resistance. It was an attempt at destroying Federation morale. The humans adopted a symbol that had shockingly fatalistic meaning. A red circle was clearly Mars, but the skull, it was a message. Until every living human on the planet was nothing but a skull, they would fight to stop us. And even then, they would build a wall out of their own bodies. Humans will fight to the death for what is theirs by claim, right, or by simple decision of it being so. We learned a very clear lesson here. Humans do not surrender, not to a superior military force, not to an unknown enemy, not to overwhelming odds. Given a reason to fight, humans will fight beyond all reason, beyond all sanity, and in some cases, beyond what should kill them.
The lecturer sounded almost a little impressed.
Now, that is all for this lecture. Our next lecture will be covering the year between the meeting between human ambassadors and Federation peacekeepers during Year 7, and the events that we have discussed taking place during Year 8, and the unleashing of the 4 horsemen. Class dismissed.
Lecture 8. Humans are vengeful. The lecturer watched his class. More and more of them were using personal and custom datapads. A few even had physical writing equipment. He resisted the urge to show his joy. It wasn't much, but at least he could open a few eyes.
I will start today's lecture with a recording,
he said, and pressed a small button on the lectern. On the screen behind him, an image of a Federation base on Earth appeared, showing Federation troopers running about. The air shook with what at first seemed to be thunder. The noise continued on the echoing roar of what the class identified as continued, ongoing explosions. It was as if someone was launching an orbital strike. The base itself was about the same size as a small town, clearly one of the main centers of the operation. "Commander, a message from Fleet Command. There are no human ships in orbit." A voice was clearly recorded from elsewhere.
"What do you mean, no ships in orbit? There is an orbital strike. There is nothing else it could be,"
a somewhat stressed voice said, clearly the commander. "The Fleet Command have double-checked the scanners. No orbital disturbances. Nothing that would indicate satellite strikes or stealth vessel, even if the humans did have those."
"Then what is in the name of the Council, is it? Some kind of aircraft?"
This was followed by the sounds of nervous shuffling. "Our anti-air systems have reported nothing that could indicate an aircraft." There was a pause, one far too long to be anything good.
"Then what, in the name of the Firstborn, is pushing our shields to their limits?"
The commander exploded at whoever was reporting him.
"You know what? I don't care. Get it out there and find out how long it is going to last."
"Yes, sir." The recording cut.
In the final years of the Soul War, when the Federation fleet was forced to retreat from Earth, at the same time humanity launched what appeared to be a desperate attack on our ground forces. What we were unaware of was just quite what we were facing. Humanity refused to allow us any chance to recover our groundside troops. They refused all contact whatsoever. Every attempt was met with silence, or promises of making us pay the blood debt we owed them. This recording is taken from a few Federation outposts that was capable of withstanding the assault for more than a few weeks. He paused. It was in this year also humanity unleashed every weapon in its forbidden arsenal. We faced chemical weapons that ate through atmospheric sealed suits and melted flesh, technological devices that could take control of a creature's nervous system and turn them into nothing more than puppets for the humans. Flame-based weapons, nuclear devices of all shapes and sizes, large arrays that could direct enough radiation to boil any creature's vital fluids. The humans waged war we had never seen before. They had weapons that were so unfathomably horrific that large portions of our forces retreated to Federation strongholds. And even then we faced the abominations humans had made, biological weapons that ravaged anything with non-Terran DNA. The worsts were the cookie cutters, or as the humans called them, the pulpers.
He clicked on to the next slide. It was a strange device that looked like a little bit like a medical pill. 2 clear halves, however, it was covered in tiny spheres.
This is a cookie cutter. They are small enough to be absorbed into the bloodstream through most mucous membranes, or even just punching through the skin at high enough velocities. The humans would deliver them through all kinds of methods, bullets, gas grenades, even artillery shells. Ah, yes, human artillery. We will get to that in a moment. Anyway, these devices, once in the bloodstream, would wait for a period of time. The period of time seemed to be random, or human-controlled. However, whenever one in the body went off, the rest would always go off as well. Once in the bloodstream, they would circulate all over the body. Then, he clicked the button, and an image started to animate. The top half of the structure rotated one way, and the other spun in a counter-rotation, accelerating to high speeds before all the ball bearings were released and flew outwards, and the top and bottom halves also broke apart and flew away. The metal balls would perforate soft tissue, organs and the like, often eyes and sections of the brain as well, turning whoever suffered them into a bag of pulp, as the humans termed it. And think about it. You were in a shuttle, safe and clear from a firefight, glad to have survived. Then there's a soft whizzing noise, and your buddy across from you slumps down, eyes turned to paste and leaking from their sockets. Suddenly, the entire shuttle is asking themselves if they are next or if they are safe. Panic, paranoia, and fear. The next slide was pulled up. A strange weapon. It looked like an oversized rocket tube, except it was angled on its side. The humans' use of chemical-propelled kinetic weapons has led to the development of military technology in a strange direction. Despite clearly developing beyond such basic and unreliable methods as is shown by their orbital fleet, they still make use of them. This is called artillery. The humans use it to hurl huge chunks of metal at foes over insane distances. Originally, they were just solid lumps of metal when first developed as cannons. However, in the modern era, the payloads can vary and carry anything from high explosives to chemical weapons. The noise that was heard in the background was called the artillery barrage by the humans. It is where they take an array of several dozen of these artillery guns and continually shell a location. The humans pummeled the shield for 5 solar cycles straight before the reserve power of the base was sabotaged, at which point they continued to fire on the base for 3 more cycles after that, even deploying several owl-delivered projectiles. Luckily, none contained nuclear weapons. Yes, the humans unleashed firepower comparable to an orbital strike for 7 full cycles. This, however, was not the full extent of the human intention. He pressed the button, and the recording started to play once more. Commander, our audio receptors are picking something up. It was the same voice as before, quite likely the commander's adjutant.
Well, hurry up and play it then,
the commander responded. There was a pause. Then a noise could be heard, and more precisely several noises. The first and clearest was a deep rumbling growl, clearly coming from several different sources. Underneath this, there was another layer of noise, rising and falling to some kind of unknown pattern, punctuated with a human voice.
What are they saying?
The commander asked. It appears to be some kind of human war song. They are singing about fighting foes, shattering armor, fighting until they cease to be sane, asking how many foes they can kill and fighting till nothing is left alive. The commander's aide sounded a little shaken.
But they don't know that we can hear them. This is for their own morale and not an attempt to break ours. Why aren't they singing about glorious victory?
The commander asked. The Federation used similar tactics, singing songs about glorious victory and the spoils of war to inspire troops. They don't seem to care, sir. They don't care about winning. They only care about killing us, sir. The recording clicked off. The lecturer resumed. This recording was taken a few hours before the artillery barrage ceased. The Federation were not aware that the artillery strikes were not the actual attack, but what the humans call softening the target. The noise that you could hear over the human music was a human petrochemical engine. He clicked onto the next slide. This was an image of a massive war machine, several meters tall, at 15 meters long and 4 or 5 meters wide. It seemed to move by way of linked tracks on either side. Mounted on its main body was a pair of titanic weapons, clearly more human kinetic projectile weapons. It had more weapons scattered across its body, smaller kinetic projectile weapons, explosive launchers, and even a few clearly stolen Federation weapons mounted on some kind of turret. This is a human tank, a mechanized land vehicle made for combat, plated in armor and carrying reverse-engineered Federation shield technology. Its primary weapon is the large turret atop it. It fires pretty much any munitions the humans want it to. Capable of rotating at almost any angle, the weapon is mostly used to engage hard targets. The several smaller weapons, such as the ones mounted atop the turret and the explosive launchers, are used on personnel.
The humans who drive these vehicles often tend to play music when engaging in open combat. In this case, the humans were all playing the same song. When functioning independently, they often play whatever they like. The following recording was taken from the base a few moments after what the humans define as an entire division of tanks rolled into the base at the same time as the Federation forces were emerging from their defensive structures at the end of the barrage. He clicked on the recording, and what sounded like pure chaos came through the speakers. The first thing the students identified was gunfire and screams, then the grinding of metal over stone, and finally, human music. Different songs at rising and falling volumes as the human military vehicles moved about. On the video, all was smoke and gunfire. The only things that told the students what was going on were bursts of light from plasma fire or huge orange flashes from the human explosives. Through the gates of hell, as we make our way to heaven, were the first lines that could be heard as a tank rolled right past whatever was recording the video. After a few seconds, it became clear there was some kind of scout drone that had been disabled but was still transmitting. "You've been thunderstruck," before the crunching noise of the video tilted sideways as another tank appeared to roll over its position. "Master of War," echoed as a vision of a drone went dark for a moment as a tank drove over it and away into the smoke. More screams and explosions as the drone was tossed across the area, giving a spinning, dizzying view of the area. Bodies scattered everywhere, some clearly crushed under the treads of the tanks. A thud as the drone landed. Out of the smoke, another large tank emerged and rolled right towards the drone, looming over it. "Take a look at the sky before you die. It's the last time you will." The recording cut out with a violent crunch as the drone was flattened under the treads of a tank. The lecturer returned the images to the three-dimensional rotating image of the tank. "That is what the humans' mechanized assault looked like, and sounds like, at least in the case of tanks. Humans have several other mechanized assault methods, which we may cover at some point in the future. However, as you can see, this is a level of violence and destruction the humans unleashed upon our ground forces." He stopped to change slides, skipping over the recording just played to get to the next slide. It appeared that now the Federation ground forces were not going to be receiving reinforcements, and retreating meant suffering the wrath of the Four Horsemen. The humans knew that their only option was to defeat all Federation bases. The larger locations, command centers, and supply depots were crushed, much like shown here. The humans turned every weapon they had ever built loose upon Federation troops. Before the actions of the rogue elements, the humans offered the option of surrender. And surrendering meant that you would simply be put in an area where you could do no harm, then treated like a guest till the war was over. This time, surrender was never an option. You could try, but the humans would ignore you, either killing you all the same, or leaving you in their midst of devastation that they had now wrought in the ashes of your erstwhile comrades. Some humans called it turnabout, or returning the favor. Others termed it making the feds pay the price, or collecting on the debts of the dead. No matter what the humans called it was clear that they were out for vengeance. The Federation troops that survived, barely, or were captured towards the end called it the Year of Hell, and some even still suffer PTSD to this day. He paused and glanced at his notes. It is surprising, however, that the troops that had been captured prior to this were not harmed, nor were they even informed. Once the war was officially over, they were loaded aboard a human cargo vessel and dropped off on the edge of Federation space with an emergency beacon active for the Federation forces to identify. It is shocking just how compassionate humans can be, even while incited to such rage that they'll draw upon the darkest and most foul creations they have ever made. He turned the lights back up and looked at the class. That is all for today. Next lecture, I expect to see your rewritten drafts and at least a few references or research links. Please email them to me via extranet. Class dismissed. Chapter 9. Humans retake Luna. Once the class had walked in and settled down, the lecturer did not bother to welcome them to his class. The Direct Neural Interface, or the DNIU, or June chip as the humans refer to it, as are most things this irregular, it's a human development. Originally developed as an entertainment enhancer, this device rapidly found its way into almost all parts of human life. The lecturer launched into his lecture without much introduction. He wanted the students to wrap their heads around just how far the humans had gone to reclaim their moon as fast as possible. A simple metal disc inserted into the connection point between the spine and skull. It is capable of intercepting nerve impulses and either preventing them from leaving the brain or entering it, as well as translating them into electrical signals. Originally, it was used for so-called total immersion technology, allowing humans to control robots in hazardous environments, training simulations, so on and so forth. However, human military forces took this a step further. This implant, almost universal in all humans, is capable of allowing a human to make use of powered combat armor, preventing the issues the Federation has faced with such equipment for centuries. Muscle tearing, overextension, and so on and so forth. There are some who believe that human fighter pilots make use of Dune chips to link with their vehicle to better control it. There are even some rumors that suggest human captains connect to their battleship's AI, creating a human-AI hybrid for the battle function of the ship. Though, I will stress, these are mere rumors. The slide behind him showed a simple hexagonal disc of metal that was filled with clear plastic, nanometer-sized circuitry visible layered within. He looked around at the class. They were looking at the device on the screen and quietly taking notes, a few conversing about the potential of such a device. The humans have also used it for medical reasons. A human whose nerves have been degenerated or been damaged can have the prosthetic attached and then connected to the Dune chip and have the tissue alleviated. He moved on to the next slide. The image was hazy at best, but it showed a human figure, far larger and far bulkier, seeming to be made out of ceramic and metal plates. Where its face should be, there was a pair of glowing red eyes, angled sharply in an imitation of human facial features of anger. Across the rest of the faceplate was a spiked maw, filled with serrated teeth. It took the class a second or two to realize it was painted on, not an actual weapon. The suit itself was dull gray, with splashes of black. The only real color was on the shoulder plate where a rank insignia was painted. This is the human infantry class powered mobile combat suit, or mobile suit, or as some humans call it, power armor. This is a video taken during the humans' retaking of the lunar facilities. The humans would land shuttles anywhere along the exposed tunnels and simply cut their way in, using the shuttles itself to seal the breach. Other human forces, not concerned with the facility's integrity, simply crashed their shuttles through biodomes or into more fragile areas. The armor they wore protected them from the impact. He pressed a small button on the lectern, starting a recording. The recording bobbed up and down, clearly taken from some retaking trooper's helmet camera. The trooper was running. The humans, however, seemed unhurried, walking along, the tramping echoes of the metal boots sounding like a pounding war drum. As the glowing red eyes of the armor retreated in the smoke, the trooper took cover in what was clearly a prepared position. Several other troopers there, ready and waiting, plasma casters aimed down the corridor. The glowing red eyes reappeared as the smoke cleared. The troopers opened fire on the approaching humans. Globes of glowing white energy lanced out at the human troopers. Several shots missed. However, one shot hit the lead human on the shoulder. It stumbled back, yelling something in its language, magnified and distorted by the sweetness in the suit, then recovered its balance and opened fire. The weapon it was holding was not a conventional human kinetic weapon. It spewed a pale white substance that erupted into flames and stuck to everything. The troopers manning the position screamed. The humans marched on. The one holding the flame-hurling weapon ignored them, stopping only to stamp on the neck of the fallen foe. The next image was of a second human. This human's faceplate was painted in a lurid yellow with red lines on it, further driving home the image of the utmost anger and fury. It repeated the words previously yelled before using its sidearm to finish off whichever trooper had the helmet camera. Alien scum was the last thing that was seen in the image was the boot of the human descending on the camera. The recording stopped. As you can see, the human mobile suits are not only resistant to plasma weapons, but capable of carrying a diverse array of weapons and ammunition for it. Humans tend to build variations upon a basic design. For example, he moved on to the next slide. It was a diagram of a human power armor. This is the basic human power armor from the Soul War period.
The humans provided us with this, as it is now obsolete, and without the June chip, no Federation trooper could hope to control it. It has several key functions. It is airtight with various recycling functions. A human could survive 2 weeks in it without any detriment. It has several weapons or armor mounting points, and the power source is housed within the armored back cavity to prevent damage. The power source is classified and never shared. These are the variants used. He moved on to the next slide, and over a dozen version images of the original suit were displayed. The students looked a little aghast. Why would you make this many versions when it would be more productive to make a specialist suit for every job? To list but a few examples, he enlarged one image. The suit was covered in extra armor plating and carried only a single weapon, a shoulder-mounted low-caliber kinetic weapon. This is an Aegis-class suit. It is supposed to function as a shield, taking hits from heavy weapons while advancing. The next suit is known as the Void Shark suit. He moved on to the next enlarged image. The suit had thrusters in its back, strange clamp-like rings on its feet, and on its wrists seemed to be mounted cutting tools. The humans would deploy shuttles full of these suits in void combat. The humans would then disembark the shuttles and approach Federation ships slow enough to not be considered a projectile, then cut their way into Federation ships and eliminate the crew. He moved on to the next slide. This is all important to remember, as the lunar base was the Federation staging ground for reinforcement shuttles, as the Federation could not gain orbital supremacy. So upon the attack that has since become known as the Ride of the Four Horsemen, where the Federation fleet was forced to retreat, though he called it a retreat, the videos from past lecture made it look like a rout. The humans launched an assault on the lunar base, taking unaware Federation troopers by surprise, and making use of these mechanized combat suits to crush resistance. We've been led to believe that humanity only gave these suits to their most trained veteran troopers. The slide behind him showed a still image of 7 of these combat suits, standing in a circle in the center of a biodome. The entire dome was littered with corpses of Federation troops, Kursk, Trikal, Ordean, and even Torsek. The troopers stood there like statues amongst the slaughter they had unleashed. This became far worse when the humans managed to shrink Federation shield tech, as they no longer had to rely on armor to protect them. The humans became more violent and bold with these mobile suits. The only other encounters with human power armor has occurred on planet-side combat. The last few Federation troops that survived on Mars till the humans deployed reinforcements reported surrendering to these mobile suits, he explained before pausing. The fall of Lunar Base was not pretty nor clean. The humans deployed in aggressive and destructive manners and took no prisoners, even venting some areas of the base to the void simply to make taking control far easier. He moved on to the next slide, a simple, empty slide. That is the end of this lecture, as far as the facts go. There is plenty more in conjecture and theory, rumors and other such things. I am also informed that we may have a visiting lecturer talking about this topic at some point in the semester. I encourage you to go listen to them. Class dismissed. End of story. Lecture 10. Federation retreats and the future opens. The lecturer looked at his students. They looked worried and stressed. This was the last lecture, and they had but a single decacycle to finish their coursework. I am glad to see that most of you attended the Admiral's lecture. This is our final lecture on the Soul War. We will be covering the Federation's retreat from human-controlled space and the peace talks that occurred, as well as recent events. He moved on to the first slide, a battered and ruined Federation fleet with a large orange gas giant in the background. This is the location that was the given minimum distance humanity would accept as a fair retreat distance for the Federation fleet. Though it is made clear that while humanity was well out of range of any Federation weapons, the Federation was still in striking range of the Four Horsemen. It was at this location that the Federation fleet watched humanity retake the locations that the Federation had bled and suffered to hold on to. Federation troops were offered the choice to surrender or death. Sometimes they were not offered that choice. Those that held Mars were not given the option, for as guerrilla fighters were still causing issues and holding out. While on Luna, the war was quick and painless. One of the human mobile suit units had been deployed. Most of the extended lunar bases surrendered, not wishing to face the silent, implacable monsters humanity had made. Earth itself was a mixed bag. He moved on to the next slide. The 4 horsemen held in silent position, facing the Federation fleet. Silent, ominous, and an ever-present threat. Between them was a collection of human ships, repainted and clearly stolen Federation shuttles, and a single human dreadnought. This is the meeting between the Federation and humanity and the retreat of the Federation. There are no recordings of this meeting. However, humanity explained that if the Federation retreated from human-controlled space and from the nearest habitable systems, then humanity would cease prosecuting the war against Federation forces. However, it still had to hunt down and eliminate any rogue elements that either side faced. It also informed the Federation that several human naval elements had gone rogue and that any actions taken by said elements were not indicative of human intentions. This is believed to be the forces that burned the Tolsec homeworld. He looked at the class. They seemed to not react. At this point, well aware of what rogue elements meant and what had happened. The Federation agreed to these terms on the condition that humanity did not deploy any military forces towards Federation space. Humanity insisted on a band of space that neither side could place the military forces in. The Federation was forced to agree. He moved on to the next slide. This was an image of a fleet of ships, clearly human-made, over the Trical homeworld, right above their heads. Normally, I would spend the rest of the lecture going over the 2 centuries of non-conflict, the minor issues that happened, the armed trader agreement, and counter-piracy declarations. But a lot of that is no longer relevant due to the events that took place over the last 5 cycles. This is Strike Fleet Acer. This is not an image, but rather a live feed from the observation satellite. As you all know, the Federation invited Strike Fleet Acer and its admiral to speak as a gesture of goodwill and a reopening of diplomatic communications. 200 solar cycles after the war was ended, humanity seemed more than willing to agree to this, and as you can see, Strike Fleet Acer is currently in a defensive orbit of Federation homeworld. This renders a lot of the minor issues stretching back over the previous solar cycles not worth studying for anything other than a historical record keeping. He shifted one of his antennae in an indication of thoughtfulness. Humanity has been trading with the Federation for almost a century and a half now. The position of the Federation was that so long as trade benefited the Federation, it was approved. Now, however, it is clear that it is being called into question. There is little that can be added from a historical perspective, so there is little to study here. I can only encourage you to document all that goes on here from historical records and ensure that you have your coursework in on time. He moved on to the next slide, an image of several Federation trade vessels. On the topic of trade, the general trade between the Federation and human space has been for Federation technology or raw resources in return for human-made goods or unique resources. Humanity is the foremost producer of recreational intoxicants and unique food products in the local galactic cluster, meaning most of humanity's trade consists of consumables, whereas a lot of what they purchase is a large piece of technology or raw resources required to further their scientific research or production capabilities. Over the past 2 centuries, this has led to them catching up with the Federation. He paused. I apologize, this lecture is short. However, it is very difficult to give a lesson on history as it is unfolding right above our heads. The rest of the lecture will be dedicated to any questions or assisting in writing of your coursework. End of story. Supplemental number 1. Soulverse, Dogs and the Federation. A pamphlet for Federation members about humans and canine predators are also called dogs. Dogs, a unique creature, unique amongst both the galaxy and amongst humans, while several pack-based species have joined the greater galactic community. Their pack-based tendencies are reserved for their own species. Humans, however, will bond with most anyone or anything. Dogs themselves share this trait, but only with humans. They will form their own packs or pack bond with humans. There are no other species on the wider galactic stage that share this trait. What is even more irregular is the fact that the bond is capable of driving both species to shocking feats. Most pack species work together as a pack to achieve greater goals than an individual could. However, those who cannot contribute any longer are ousted. Humans achieved this by taking in the species very early in the evolutionary cycle. It is suspected this was either achieved by taking young canines from the wild, or more likely a cohabitation that came from shared advantages. The humans would feed the canines and share the warmth of the fire with them. In return, the canines would help defend the human home and warn of nearby animals. This hyper-early integration of two such species has led to several geneticists to speculate if this co-functioning system is no longer simply an extended case of two creatures working together, but a case where the very early integration of it now hard-coded into the creature's genes. It has been documented that canines can survive in the wild, but only for short periods of time. Humans can survive without a canine companion. However, in almost all cases, they function better with one. The canine predators also come in several unique breeds, ranging from minuscule creatures, barely larger than 24 centimeters, to creatures that are as large, if not larger, than humans. The Federation is also informed there is a unique species that was bred to be large enough to ride. This species is yet to be encountered in Federation space. They have different patterns and lengths of fur. When encountering a human with a quadruped companion that cannot be identified, it is assumed it is a canine predator and to be treated as such. This has led to several newsworthy events, including a Federation officer savaged by a dog due to the creature being under the impression the officer was attempting to harm its owner, despite the officer attempting to deliver first aid. Below are several of the more significant events. A human taking on a Sithun in unarmed combat to rescue a canine companion. The Sithun, for those that are not familiar with the Korsk homeworld, is a 2-meter predator that relies on its strength and speed to capture prey and drag it back to its nest. This creature is best compared to a Terran bear, for those more familiar with the human homeworld, or an enraged Tricle. The Sithun in question had captured the dog and was dragging it by its head away from the human. Most sane creatures would at this point understand that there was nothing that they could do. The human grabbed the Sithun by the throat and attempted to bludgeon it to death with his bare fists. Both the human and the dog survived. The dog in question, however, had to undergo surgery. The human refused treatment for his own wounds until the dog was safe. The second incident is a case involving a large breed of canine. The creature in question was found outside a military base, attempting, it was believed at the time, to harass patrols. However, the creature did no significant damage and seemed to be under significant stress. Eventually, several Federation troops followed the creature, only to find an injured and out-cold human. The human in question had suffered serious injury and was in need of medical attention. Upon being taken to the military base for treatment, the dog was not taken with the human, assuming that it was unimportant. The creature found its way into the military base, and through a combination of a level of awareness with the troops and the one soldier who attempted to stop it being mauled rather badly, found its way to the medical ward where its pack leader was being treated. It refused to leave his side for the 3 days it took the human to recover. Eventually, troops started to feed it with the worry that it may be starving itself. Any attempt at removing the creature resulted in violence, as did any attempt at taking its human anywhere without allowing it to accompany. Upon the human waking up, the entire facility was made aware of the fact that by the canine making loud barking noises and attempting to drag the few soldiers that had fed it to its human. It is assumed this was an attempt to introduce the good people it had met to its human. These are just 2 noteworthy incidents amongst dozens within Federation space. Human history and news records are littered with thousands of stories of humans and their canine companions. Humans are protective of their companions as they are for their own young. This has led to the Federation creating a series of rules for interacting with humans with canine companions. Additionally, any creature found breaking these rules without undue reason will not be protected by Federation laws against any harm that comes to them. This is due to the previous events where humans have almost gone to war over injured canine companions. For interacting with a canine companion alone, 1. Do not approach. 2. Only interact if the creature appears to be attempting to get your attention. 3. Follow the creature if it leads you, but take companions. 4. Do not harm the creature. 5. If the creature attacks you, cover your face and back away to a populated area. Or interacting with canine companion with a human. 1. Do not harm the creature. 2. Do not threaten the human. 3. Ask permission before touching the creature. 4. If a creature growls, back away slowly. 5. Follow any instructions given by the human regarding the creature. The following addendum is for all Federation military personnel with human crew members. If a human crew member has a canine companion, it is best to rely on the human for information. As per both human and Federation law, the companion must be trained to a competent level and be capable of functioning aboard a spaceship. So long as the canine is in the company of a human and you are not hostile to either, there is nothing to fear. Any concerns should be reported to a senior officer. Captain Vesuan looked up from the pamphlet, looking at the 3 beings before him, a rather annoyed Korsk that was absolutely soaked through, a rather ashamed human, and a shockingly large 4-legged predator that was currently sat on its hindquarters licking its own buttocks. He looked back at the pamphlet and highlighted the section reading, "Yet to be encountered in Federation space," and marked it for review regarding the current situation he was dealing with. End of story. Grand Fleet Center. Minutes from Federation Council meeting 6939, last meeting of the solar cycle before breaking for the renewal festival. Report to the Federation Council and human propaganda from the Social Master Grand High. Humanity has been rather persistent with its propaganda over the past few months, broadcasting on almost all spectrums messages of peace, prosperity, kindness, and family, even while it is putting pressure on the outer edges of the world space, used by pirates and continuing to apply pressure to the Zerzek Empire with continued military raids. The strange factor unifying most of these propaganda messages are the presence of the decorated Oboiro creature, suspected to be slain as part of some ritual hunt. There is also the exchanging of gifts and gathering of families. This all takes place during what for most of the human home planet is a cold season. We expect this to be something to do with the fact that humans prefer to remain inside during this time, unless it takes part in almost suicidal activities that involve hurtling down a mountain at unreasonably high speeds. While this is a human tradition, as our research has shown, it is also likely made use as a tactical form of propaganda to display humanity as a peaceful and kind society despite its continued minute taker notes. It is at this point the High Military Commander entered the Council chamber against protocol and risking termination. High Military Commander, I have an urgent report for the Council. There are over 6,000 human coalition fleets requesting access, over half of them military, and pestilence is amongst them. There are also over 80,000 human trade and civilian ships that have just jumped into Federation space without a license or request. 2 months earlier, aboard the flagship Azrael of the Heavenly Host of Assault Fleet, the commander, Gabriel, looked at the 3 ensigns inside. So, let me get this straight. You were caught planning to steal one of the Seraphim lighter craft and go, he paused to look at the report he was given, gift-giving and spreading holiday cheer in the form of care packages across the Federation. There was a collective shuffling of feet from the offending troopers and suppressed giggles across the bridge. The commander rubbed his temples. You cannot just go joyriding in one of our assault lighters across Federation space, let alone drop unknown care packages to random worlds. What do you think would happen if you dropped something that was toxic to the local populace? He tossed the data slate containing the report to one of the side tables. You need to plan these things out, not to mention a single lighter may get shut down. You need an escort. The 3 ensigns looked more confused than before. Well, go on, get off my bridge and get to station. It seems we need to make a pit stop at Satellite Earth. He turned back to his crew. Contact Sacred Gate Station. Forward our revised flight plan to the Terran High Command. And someone send a message to the Morningstar, Odinson. They'll both want in on this. And contact Davy Jones. This is right up his alley. Any of the other commanders stupid or insane enough to think this is a good idea? He asked Richard Lodge. There was a pause as there was some consideration. After a few moments, one of the communications officers spoke up. Maybe, sir. This seems like something Arthur and his lot might be up for. The commander nodded. All right, then send the signal to Camelot Station. See if Arthur and the Knights are up for a little crusade. It didn't take long for the message to be passed about. While some organizations opposed this blatant misuse of military power, the slow, growing support from the civilian populace and the fact that the 4 of the largest fleets as well as the most powerful and versatile raiding fleet had committed to the action regardless of orders meant that High Command had little choice but to give Operation Let It Snow the green light. The problem, however, was not only the scale of the operation, but the amount of logistical problems. Specific species could or could not have specific things. How could they know what to do with it? The list went on, and so as more problems were presented, more people were brought in on work on the operation. Eventually, the story got out, and then there was no stopping it. It spread like wildfire. Humanity was bringing Christmas to the Federation. News agencies were told that they were not allowed to run segments on the up-and-coming operation. However, they were encouraged to play lots of Christmas propaganda directed at the Federation. How to build a snowman, the rules for snowball fights, snow angels for each species, and even various Christmas movies. Larger extranet forums started discussing on how to build various species of snow aliens with guides and pictures, instructions on how to decorate a tree and what it was for. Ambassadors to the Federation denied any knowledge of the operation and told their contacts within the Federation that this was totally normal. Humans just like this time of year, and it was a celebration like their renewal festival. When it came time to assemble the fleet, officially designated Super Fleet Alpha 7, however, most of the crew and commanders had taken to calling it Fleet Center. The military was astounded. Not only did the designated military ships arrive, but so did almost a full quarter of the human captain civilian ships. The final word in the scale of the operation, however, was when Pestilence left its defensive orbital position around Earth to join the fleet. The Horsemen were granted relative autonomy compared to most other military fleets, permitted to grant their assistance to any military operation the captains deemed suitable. However, this was a nigh upon unheard of occurrence. They mostly remained guarding the Sol system and Earth itself. No one had asked the captain of the supership to join them. No one had even asked if the Horsemen were to be involved. It was just assumed that they would remain at the station, as they always had. Present day. The fleet hung arrayed across in the void, a few hundred kilometers from the invisible line that marked the edge of human and Federation space. Holds that normally carried ammunition, weapons, and high explosives, now loaded with crates upon crates of food, toys, games, data slates loaded with stories and novels. It was a tense situation. They were for the function of stellar combat, unarmed. Ammunition stores had been swapped out for more storage, for even more presence. The only ship that was still combat capable was Pestilence, and that was due to her immense size and role within the operation. Their protection against pirates was the threat that such a large fleet presented, and the goodwill of humanity. Messages bounced back and forth. Civilian freighters had skipped the line and gone straight to their objective planets. Eventually the call was made. A small transport shuttle, owned by a private merchant outfit, decided that the consequences be damned. Christmas was happening no matter where one was in the galaxy. The shuttle fired up its engines and crossed the border. Then another shuttle. Then the bigger freighters moved in. It didn't take long till the fleet was moving. Inside the Federation Council chamber, it was anarchy. There were peace accords and alliance. Why would the humans attack? And with the Horsemen, no less. It wasn't until the second messenger arrived with a letter from every human ambassador within Federation space. The council was confused. Messages were sent by extranet or to be delivered by in person verbally. This was irregular. They knew the humans communicated by letter sometimes, but that was for interpersonal relationships. Treaties were also signed on hard storage. Was this strange mass demand for surrender? The council demanded the messenger open one of them up, so at random she did, reading it out for the council to hear.
The front says, peace and goodwill to all, and appears to have a picture of some kind of small building with a star. It appears to open so it can be propped up, as if to display itself. There's nothing inside but a message.
The council insisted she read on, still under the impression this was some kind of trick.
The inside reads, to the Federation High Council, I hope this card finds you well. Christmas wishes and enjoy the gifts. Best regards, Ambassador of Agriculture and Farming, Alexander. P.S. The fleet is bringing gifts.
The messenger looked up at the council members, who looked at each other in shock.
There was a sudden flurry of activity as the council members forgot their standing and moved to the floor of the chamber and started opening the messages. All of them were very similar. Folded, reinforced paper with some message of happiness or goodwill on the front and various depictions of all kinds of things, from trees to smiling old men in strange hats. All of them also had very similar messages, wishing the council and the entire Federation well and insisting the fleet had no intention of harming the Federation. Eventually, it was decided that the council would visit one of the human ambassadors to demand an answer. In the void of space, the flotilla of ships that by now officially designated itself in humanity's records as Grand Fleet Center had arrayed itself and jumped to FTL. Each ship had a destination. Each ship's cargo was specifically selected for the species of the target planet. Pestilence, however, had another objective. The horsemen jumped from one Federation system to the next, deploying drones in each. Bjorn Odinson sat in his command chair. The man was the largest commander in the Acer fleet to date, almost 7 feet tall and built like a tank. His elevation to commander had resulted in the command chair needing to be replaced to suit his size. Rather than his normal uniform, he wore a bright red outfit with fluffy cuffs. He had even dyed his normally ginger beard white. The whole ensemble was capped off by what sat atop his head. Rather than a normal soft cap of a command sat a bright red Santa hat. The pom-pom in the end, flashing on and off, was internal light. "All right, let's show the Federation what Christmas means. Set course, low orbit, match location with the primary city. Deploy the jingle bombers." He sounded like he was enjoying this far more than he had any right to. The command bridge, however, did their best to suppress giggles and followed the orders. All across the Federation, military outposts were in a state of disarray. Humanity ships were pouring over borders and checkpoints without regard for protocol or for customs checks, all while broadcasting a disorienting combination of rescue ship codes, cheery human music, and wishes of good health and joy to anyone who could hear them. Outpost 7 Delta 6 received a request to dock from a human cargo ship. Confused and unsure of what to do, the commanding officer approved the request, just so that they could ask the humans what was going on. He suspected this was some kind of strange psychological warfare or something. 2 of his underlings insisted that it was nothing but good news, citing some obscure extranet forum they were part of. What the commander didn't expect was that his underlings were correct. The human cargo ship docked and instantly began to offload cargo. The commander had handed a small box wrapped in some kind of shiny paper. Flustered and out of his depths when told that it was his and he should open it by one of the crew members, he did so, only to be greeted with a box full of crystallized honey. For his species, the substance was a natural high that was sold with strict tariffs and quite a high price. The commander stuttered and attempted to hand the box back, only for the human crew to laugh at him and insist that he keep it. It was a gift from humanity to him. Every other member of the station was sought out and handed boxes. These ranged from small boxes of crystallized honey to collections of the latest human-produced video games. The human ship's engineer handed over a comparatively huge crate to the station's engineering team. The crate, it turned out, was full of custom-made toolboxes that followed the owner around and were voice-activated to hand over the precise tool asked for. The station's crew was shocked and perplexed, and became even more confused when the humans began to set up a large table and cover it in food. The 2 underlings took the time to explain what they'd seen in the extranet forum and what they'd been told by the humans. This was a celebration of kindness and family amongst humans, to be shared with friends and competitions, of gift-giving and receiving and joy in food. The commander of the station took his time to evaluate the situation, ensuring that the food that the humans had set out was not toxic to his species, almost consuming the entire supply of cranberry sauce in the process. Finally accepting that this was not some kind of trick, the station master ordered that the station be put in low power and for the crew to join the human messengers in the cargo bay for Christmas dinner. The scene was being repeated all across Federation space, stations being hailed and docked with. On planets, however, shuttles and lighter craft were dropped care packages, using technology that humanity had mastered in the 20th century to deliver species-specific gifts all across Federation space.
Some crates were labeled for your younglings, containing children's toys, bedtime stories, and other child-friendly substances. Some were for everyone, containing species-wide gifts, data slates with subscriptions to various media companies prepaid for a year. Huge collections of family board games. Then there were crates for adults, loaded with food, mild intoxicants for specific species, collection of human movies loaded on data slates. Then the drones from Pestilence entered the atmosphere, deploying clouds of nanites into the atmosphere over inhabited areas. The nanites bonded together and made use of atmospheric chemicals to produce various forms of snow that would be harmless to the inhabitants of the planet. Suddenly, all across the Federation, it was snowing, presents falling from the sky, and wishes of goodwill and joy being broadcast from every human ship. It was the children who first understood. Having been bombarded with adverts and stories from the human media companies, they suddenly understood. It was Christmas. At first, it was just the children. Then the adults grew curious and got involved. Species that had never seen humans were having first snowball fights, building snow humans or snow aliens. On the Federation capital world, the council was marching through the streets towards Ambassador Alexander's residence while this was happening. Having left in a hurry, their aides were still trying to collect the required data slates and information for such a visit. The council members reached the gated and guarded ambassador's residence. 2 burly guards looked at the council as if demanding to know why they dared to come without forewarning or an invite. The lead council member drew himself up to 4 meters of height that the strical form offered, ready to demand entrance and explanation, only to suddenly deflate as the gate was flung open by Ambassador Alexander, dressed in a strange gown, soft shoes with no back, and a red floppy hat, a glass of some red liquid in his hand. Council members, I was not expecting guests today. Come in, there should be some turkey left, and I'm sure we can find some spare wine, he said as he waved them down the path to his house. This was not what they were expecting. They were expecting the normally blustery pontificating ambassador of agricultural and farming, not the cheery half-dressed man they encountered. They had only been inside the ambassador's house a few times and never all together, often only meeting in the specifically designated side room. This time, however, they were ushered through the house and into a large, comfortable-looking room. A huge tree dominated one corner with a crackling fire in the hearth of one wall. Sat on a sofa was a woman, the ambassador's wife, who looked a little stunned at the sudden arrival of the 12 highest and most powerful creatures of the Federation. The tiny human on her lap, however, had no such qualms, pointing and clapping at the newcomers. The tiny human made noise of surprise and joy at the new creatures it could see. The noises grew louder and more excited with each new creature that filtered into the room. The third occupant of the room, a moody-looking human, who was in a transition state between child and adult, looked at his father entering the room and sighed. "What now, Dad?" The last word was elongated in frustration, though the annoyance and apparent boredom fell away when the council members filed into the room. "What now, kiddo? We've got guests. Go see if we've got any bottles of fizz left." The ambassador turned to his wife. "Dear, Pass Samantha here. Could you get some leftovers for our honored guests?" he asked as he took the tiny human off his wife and turned back to the council members. Hours passed. Things were explained. Food and drink were passed around. The council members found themselves seated about the room, each with a plate of food and a drink of some kind. The tricorps council member, a 3.5-meter monster of armor plating and battle scars, found itself the favorite climbing frame of the ambassador's daughter, who, he discovered, was barely 2 cycles old. The other council members were shocked to see the normally stoic and taciturn tricorps council member become the doting and caring creature, looking carefully after the tiny human. The human ambassador insisted they call him Alex and sat teaching several of the council members card games on the floor, while the ambassador's son played video games with the Korsk and Ordine council members. The ambassador's wife, who introduced herself as Annie, sat overseeing the whole thing, aided by a Scythian council member who had turned out having a keen interest in human crafting hobbies, and so was getting a lesson on the correct way to knit a pair of socks. And so, Christmas had come to the Federation. Next year, they'd have presents of their own to give humanity in return. End of story. The Federation and Human Ghost Stories. Report to the High Council.
human activity in Federation space delivered by High Judge for Interstellar Operations. Since the Federation-Human Alliance, there have been ever-growing reports of human ships in Federation space, some on clear missions such as trade or joint patrols. Some even have been documented as scientific vessels or the humans' pleasure cruisers. However, there are others that defy categorization. Small vessels that bear no identification or similar. Others are stories of ships that slip into FTL faster than one can identify them. Normally, these are closed down simply as irregularities or are caught in other areas and can be dealt with normally. There have been other stories perpetuated through Federation fleets. Despite the best efforts of the truth officers on preventing such things, the sources are generally human crew members. These rumors and stories all have a similar theme. A ship that has some impossible nature to it, acting in an irregular manner. These stories range from malevolent entities out in the deep dark of space through to rescues by impossible creatures. These stories have negligible impact on morale, however, appear to have a direct correlation with the increase of irregular reports we are receiving. It seems these stories have emboldened members of the Federation military to report similar sense of irregularities or other special anomalies as the supposed ghost ships. But this not being a non-regulated category, each report has to be read by the captain and passed on to relevant parties. I would advise the Council to create a ghost ship category so that the waste of higher-ranking officers' time is not wasted. Meanwhile, on the edge of Federation space, two ships sat still in the void. The long-distance research vessel, uncreatively titled Research Ship Sigma 7, was docked with a huge automated cargo hauler. This was supposed to be a standard restocking mission. The cargo hauler would drop out of FTL, the research vessel would dock up and load up on supplies before the hauler would jump off to its next destination. Neither ship was armed. Both were broadcasting panic beacons and calls for aid. The small fleet sat across from them, however, was armed to the teeth, a pirate fleet, 7 light cruisers, several retrofitted cargo haulers, and the flagship was a heavy cruiser with a human-made spinal weapon. Neither of the docked vessels would have time to spin up their FTL drives before being torn apart by the pirate ships. All hands aboard the research vessels had abandoned their tasks to watch from the bridge or portholes or other external sensor devices. The silence awaiting their death or enslavement was heavy with dread and sorrow. Then a call came from the human sensor tech. FTL Spike. The dread deepened. More pirate ships. Could this get any worse? However, what came from the ripper space was not a pirate ship. Whatever it was not a pirate. It wasn't even a Federation ship. The captain's voice shook as he called out orders. Identify that ship. I want to know. He stopped as the dark black of space was suddenly lit up burning red, and the fleet that had come out of FTL had suddenly gone shields up. Normally, shields had no color, only flashing when hit, no wasted power. These ships, however, their shields were a deep blood red. Then came the flashing of weapons. These unknown ships had taken on the pirate fleet. The archivists on the research ship scrambled to identify the unknown fleet. They found nothing. Then came the quiet voice of the sensor tech.
They don't have a sensor ping, sir, he sounded worried.
The captain turned to look at the human, expecting a prank, which had been banned after the introduction of the whoopee cushion to the ship's galley. However, he was met with a sobering truth that was no joke. All the while, out in the void, the fight raged on. The unknown ships danced through the pirate fleet, picking them apart as shots glanced off their shields. The blazing red shields matched only in intensity by the fire exchange between the two fleets. There was a flash as the spinal cannon of the heavy cruiser fired. The shot went wide of its target, slinging a chunk of metal going several significant fractions of the speed of light out into space. The attacking fleet returned fire, kinetics and energy blasts tearing at the heavy cruiser's shields.
Ha! Kinetics!
The captain of the research vessel called.
It must be a human ship.
The sensor tech rubbed his neck.
I suppose so, sir, but we've not used those ship designs since prior to the development of fuel-burning engines.
The captain looked stunned as he spluttered, which was an impressive noise coming from a tricle.
What? That's not possible. Are you suggesting these ships are some archaic impossibility?
He said, and the human nodded. The heavy cruiser ships sputtered and died as they did so. One of the red-shielded vessels pulled alongside it and unleashed a torrent of kinetic and energy weapons, ripping the heavy cruiser apart, leaving it little more than a mild navigational hazard. As the cruiser died, it fired a vengeful parting shot from its spinal cannon. The shot impacted directly on one of the shields of the attacking ships. For the observers, the depths of space flashed red. Once the light faded, the ship that had been hit had a huge section missing, its entire undercarriage gone. Then space flickered, and a glowing, shimmering red light seemed to come down in tiny particles. And before the eyes of the pirates and the research vessel's crew, the ruined part of the ship simply faded back into reality, as if it had never been hit in the first place. The pirates broke, turning away from the fight and fleeing as fast as their engines could take them. The bonds of the criminality unable to withstand the destruction of their flagship, and the unnatural immortality of the attacking ships. All but one of the attacking ships harried them out of the sector. One ship turned about, dropped shields and powered towards the still unmoving research vessel. It pulled up close enough for the crew of the vessel to see it in all its glory. A wooden sailing ship, 20 cannons aside, 3 masts rigged with blood-red sails. She flew a black flag with a single white stripe down it, and a blue dot in that white stripe. Stood atop the aft deck, saluting the crew of the vessel was a strange sight. A human skeleton dressed in ancient clothes, a tricorn hat atop his head. Strapped across his chest was a set of 6 flintlock pistols, and he had a heavy black beard that seemed to be glowing with embers of fire under him. Was the ship's name, the Queen Anne's Revenge. The research ship was stunned. No one quite understood what they'd just seen, or even what it meant. The sensor tech looked down at his sensors. There was nothing there, just the empty void. The captain finally found his voice once the ship and its skeletal captain had left.
"Jenkins," he addressed the sensor tech by his first name. What in the name of the firstborn was that?"
The sensor tech swallowed nervously.
That was, sir. It looked like a ghost ship.
Human terms of phrase. The lecturer looked at the class, mostly diplomats to be, a few officers' children, and noble sons and daughters. There were a few cameras and recording devices. This sort of lecture was useful for anyone who was working with humans. The lecturer, a Scythian of some repute, but not significant enough to be notable to the Federation. The lecturer started with a picture of a human midway through what looked like a suicidal jump off a cliff. The phrase, "Why not?" was emblazoned above it.
Humans are very unique in their language, where a 2-word phrase can mean several different things. Further to that, it's quite easy to exchange one word in that phrase to several others and retain the same intent. Yet, one word and suddenly the entire phrase can be used to mean another set of things.
The slide behind him changed, and this time it showed a set of phrases.
This is the first phrase we will be going over, generally referred to as the blanket set. These can be anything from copulated to detonated. Below the title are some examples. This can mean a few things. Generally, if aimed at an object, this can mean, "I do not care, I will ignore it," or "I'm about to disregard all recommendations and attempt something." The latter usually precedes an event that the Federation has termed a human incident.
The lecture class collectively winced or grinned. They'd all heard the term before. The term had been coined by another lecturer after a human had said the phrase, "Well, let's try it," before the entire physics lab was erased from space-time, only to return 3 weeks later. It had been submitted as part of an incident report, incident type human.
Generally, the human incident in question involves direct disregard for significant impediment or extreme risk. However, this phrase should not be confused with a very similar phrase, where the "it" is exchanged for "you."
Again, the slide changed, and this time the phrase at the top was different.
These are considered the blank "you" phrases. These are generally insults or denials of your statement. Depending the circumstances, this precedes everything from the human attempting to injure you if you have aggravated them enough, or the human storming off. In some circumstances, the human is denying your denial of his actions and will proceed to take said course of actions irregardless of your protests.
The latter uses once again result in a human incidence. It is important to note, however, this phrase can also be used in jest or in congeniality with friends. The lecturer waved at the screen. The lecture screen changed again, this time to what was clearly a confrontation between a tricle and a human, both intoxicated on some kind of chemical. The human was likely alcohol. The tricle could have been any number of substances. Words were exchanged, and eventually the human yelled at the tricle, "Thank you, buddy, and thank whatever crap spawned you," before storming off out the door. As you can see, the phrase was used in an aggressive, threatening manner, but the human still left. When a human uses the blank U phrases, you will have to use a series of context clues as well as your knowledge on that specific human to gauge what his next course of action would be. The slide changed again. This time, it was a human midway through charging a rather angry-looking monstrosity from their homeworld. The phrase, "want to bet," was written under it. One of the more famed human phrases, "want to bet," is used to indicate that you or another has stated that the human cannot or is incapable of doing something, but the human believes it is possible and has taken your disbelief as an insult. This generally results in the human attempting that very thing that you stated they were not capable of. This always precedes a human incident. An example is as follows. From the incident report of Everfree 2, the lecturer picked up the datapad and started reading. Situation report, Planet Everfree 2. There has been a disruption in the interstellar communications due to an incident involving a human ship's officer, several Korsk and a tricle officer. According to witness testimonies, the human ship officer was drinking, claiming that the local communication net was so worthless that he could take it apart with nothing more than a pair of pliers and wire clippers. An altercation started between the human and the Korsk. Eventually, the altercation was broken up by the tricle, who was an officer within the local communication network. After hearing something about this, he told the human that it was impossible. The human's response was, "Want to bet? Give me 10 minutes in any of the communication rooms, supplies and wire clippers, and it'll all go to pot." The officer, being somewhat inebriated at the time, allowed this, but did not tell the human that the communication room was disabled at the time. Despite this, the human has made some modifications to the global communications net that means that any visual communication displays the sender without any clothes or garments whatsoever. The lecturer stopped and looked at the class. If a human ever asks you if you would like a bet, the safest response is to decline. The class looked at each other, certain that while it was the safest, it might not be the most amusing. Humans' turn of phrases are also used to create shorthand phrases or descriptions of processes. For instance, it is well known that humans will choose to give close associates shorthand names that are either descriptive or a play of that person's name or attributes. I will not be going over these things to keep things short, as every species and creature has at least one. The lecturer paused and shuffled her notes. Now, there are several dozen other phrases that the humans use. I'll be covering one more, and the incident that introduced it to the Federation. Your short-term coursework is to produce a docket containing no less than 5 human phrases and their common meanings and uses. Extra credit is available for attaching incident reports involving the phrases. The lecturer moved on to a new slide, reading "Die now or later." This phrase has several variations and can even take the form of several others, but it is oft delivered in such a tone as to make its intent clear. It has 2 forms. The first is simply a human taking a highly risky decision for little more than a glory or joy. The second, however, is more important. I will now play the incident report to indicate why. The lecturer pressed a button on the controls and let the recording play. From the speakers, a shaky voice came, clearly rattled and unsure what to say. "This is the translation unavailable captain of the transport Lucky Stars, reporting the dead." The voice was cut off by someone yelling in the background. "He isn't dead, he's MIA." The voice was clearly human and heavy with emotion. The captain made a rattling noise that indicated him as a tricle. "Reporting that our engineer Alexander Eklar is MIA after repairing an external shielding system. The following recording was the last known interaction between Engineer Eklar and the crew." There was a click, followed by the sound of static hiss that was common from security recordings. "So what you're saying is that we're flying at half C in the dust cloud and our shielding is busted," a gruff human voice said. The captain responded, "That's the gist of it." A human voice cut in, the one that had interrupted the captain from earlier. Can we call for a rescue ship? There was a pause.
Too far. We'd be scrapped by the time it arrived,
A fourth voice responded.
Sorry, I got us into this mess. I did say that we needed a new nav comp.
Clearly this voice was the navigator.
I guess someone has to go out and fix it,
The gruff human asked. There was a chorus of affirmative noises.
Well, I guess I should suit up,
the human said. The affirmative noises turned to ones of shock and horror.
You'd not lost 10 minutes,
The navigator protested.
It's suicide,
The captain almost shouted.
By now or later, someone has to do it, and I'm in the engineer,
The gruff human said, and the sound of heavy tools being shifted could be heard.
You sure, Annex?
The other human asked, his voice quiet.
Yeah.
Any intelligent creature could hear a waver in the engineer's voice. He wasn't sure.
Just do me a favor and look after Moxie, and no matter how much she begs, don't give her a dairy. The vet said that it gives her the runs.
There was a dry, humorless laugh from both humans.
I will. Good luck.
See you in 10, shouldn't take long.
The sound of an airlock opening, and then the static hiss ended, indicating the security recording had finished. The captain's voice returned.
It has now been 40 of the human minutes. 25 minutes ago, our shields came back online. It has been decided by myself and the 3 remaining heads of department that we shall wait 5 more of the human minutes before resuming course.
The recording ended, and the class looked at one another. There had been stories of humans being suicidal to save close friends and their pets, especially their pets. There had even been a narrow miss with an all-out war over one specific cat. But this was above and beyond. No sane creature would commit such a suicidal act just so there might be a chance that his companions getting out of such a situation. The lecturer resumed talking.
Humans are capable of conveying a lot of information and intent in very few words. Learning what these words mean and how they are used is very important with dealing with humans in diplomatic and social settings. Class dismissed.
End of story. There will be a compilation of this video on the main channel if you're interested, and I hope you enjoyed. There will be a new one on Monday. Anyways, cheers. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Cold War Boomerwaffen, Sevaren Serberous, Bushmaster 177, Henry the Red, Casper Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon W.R.E, and Sevaren Serberous. Thank you very much.